When did you have to deal with a ridiculous, compulsive liar? Oh boy, in middle school I had a friend who claimed he had a special-made Nintendo 64 that supported 8 players. We asked if we could all come over and play, and he made up excuses. The tenants at the place where I work lie about things they do all the time and stick by their story even if you have all the evidence in the world to the contrary. Like these really trashy people we had. Their apartment looked like an episode of Hoarders. They were throwing trash out their windows, like it took me several trips with a large trash can to get all of it. Of course, they said it's not them, it must be the neighbors. Well, A, their neighbors have been out of town for weeks, B, the trash was in a big pile under their windows, not their neighbors', and C, we found multiple pieces of mail with their names and addresses on them, their old driver's license and their old library cards in the pile of trash as well. They still denied doing it. I've probably got dozens of lying tenant stories. One set lied about everything, but most couldn't be proven wrong. One spring we had 3 straight days of steady rain flooding many buildings in low-lying areas, as well as basements everywhere. This tenant called me to tell me several TVs and other electronic devices she'd stored in the basement were ruined due to water that was a foot deep down there. By the time I got there, the water had receded and the floor was only damp. She swore the water was almost to her knees and wanted my insurance to cover her losses. I had her bend down with me in front of the natural gas furnace and asked her what she saw. She was quiet when she realized that the pilot light was still burning, about an inch off the ground. Some kid my little cousin was dating said he was a Marine platoon sergeant whose convoy was once blown up and he was the only survivor, so he was discharged and given a Purple Heart and has PTSD. He was 16 at the time. A girl in my high school really blew me away with the things she thought we'd believe. My favorite was probably the story about the time that a cop cornered her and told her to put her hands against the wall. Lucky for her, it was one of those secret spinning walls like in the movies, so she ran down the secret passage and got away. I was about to say, you should be more careful about immediately dismissing people's testimony about police abusing their power against women. Then we got the Indiana Jones wall bit, and I went, okay, maybe you can dismiss that story. This woman I work with spouts off 100 pointless lies a day about her life. I can only guess because she thrives on excitement and attention, because all you can really do is roll your eyes at the crap she says. Like she said she got a $3,000 check from a lawsuit against Red Bull, that her tires are warranted for 150,000 miles because her friend works at a mechanic shop, and that her landlady gives her free rent all the time because she loves her so very much. Even one time she told me that she bought $500 worth of wacky tobacco and that it was rainbow-colored from Jamaica. Then the next day she said ants got in the bag and ate it all. The funniest part is no one's asking her about this stuff. She's just going up to everyone throughout the day and telling them all about it to make sure you heard her story. I went to school with a girl who told the most unbelievable and dramatic lies. She told people she was a Victoria's Secret model, that she owned a restaurant in Chicago, owned a color iPod mini in every color to match her outfits. I had to room with her for the DC trip. I'd just moved there and didn't know anyone. And we all got in an extremely dramatic fight that ended with her building a bed out of chairs in the bathroom and calling security. She was something. Oh, and because I really think it's funny, one time she told me she was a professional singer and that she was recording an album. Then she leaned over like she was going to tell me a secret and sang my name into my ear. Yes! Once I had a friend in high school who was constantly lying about things. There's quite a few examples, but one situation stands out to me the most. She'd been talking on and off about her parents getting divorced, which I actually thought might have been true. She said that her dad was already seeing someone else, that they'd moved into this fancy subdivision area, and that she hated her new stepmom. Now, it all seemed to have happened quickly, but it didn't seem that weird, until I spent the night at her house. When I got there, what I knew to be her dad's car was in the driveway. I said, "Is that your dad's car?" And she said, "Oh wow, he's so bold, why would he just come here?" So we headed inside. I was feeling like the next few minutes were going to be awkward, so I just headed to her room. But I can still hear everything in her living room. Here's the exact scene. My friend yelling, "What is your deal? You call yourself a dad? You can't just show up whenever you please and then go to your other—" Dad interrupting in a very confused tone, "What are you talking about?" Her mum joins in, "Honey, what's going on?" "Go to your other family, and Mom, I can't believe you're allowing this. Leave, Dad, leave!" My friend storms down the hallway to her room where I am. As she reaches the door, she says, I'm so sorry about that. I'm just sick of him showing up when he pleases. Meanwhile, we can still hear her parents in the living room. Dad says, okay, seriously, what was that? Mom says, just another day with Elsie, I guess. I felt so awkward that I didn't even question her about it. I had a friend in middle school who went to a different high school. We still Skyped every so often, and he told me about his good fortune at his new high school. Top of the class, 34 on the ACT, has a girlfriend named Jane. So, flash forward to college, I end up in the same class as some girl who went to the same high school as this friend did. I ask her if she knows him. She says he stalked her in high school and wouldn't leave her alone. Her name? Jane. I've since wondered if anything he told me was true. I like that he got a 34 on the ACT. Isn't the best score 36? You've got to draw the line somewhere, I guess. A person at my school told me that when he used to live in Scotland, he had 7 girlfriends at the same time. Another person told me that the area he used to live in was a rough area and that he was shot while living there. Then, when asked to see the wound, he said he forgot where he was shot. Co-worker at Papa John's when I worked there said that he had a black belt in Aikido because he took 2 classes and then beat the teacher, and the teacher was so impressed that he awarded him his belt, then flew a fighter jet and had PTSD from seeing combat, he wouldn't specify what location, that he had several girlfriends in different locations that he frequently traveled to, or that he hadn't dated anyone except that one perfect girl who cheated on him with a substance addict, that he was an expert hacker, that he'd been kidnapped by the mob in New York that one time, and wouldn't elaborate further. There was a bunch more, but these are the only ones I really remember. They were all ridiculous. He'd get really vague or start making up conflicting details when he was pressed. Keep in mind, this guy was like 19 to 20 and was very nerdy/scrawny, the kind of thin that you get from sitting around doing nothing, not working out or being in the military or whatever. A guy in high school would tell us all about how he was super mechanically inclined and worked on motorbikes and cars. He was so good that the owner of the shop that he supposedly worked at gave him some old beat-up muscle car that was so broken that no one could fix it. He got it working and restored, but apparently it was too nice to drive to school. His boss took such a liking to him that he let him move into one of the many houses he owned. The house had a pool, and he and his friends would take turns jumping into the pool from the roof. Apparently, his boss also encouraged him to date his daughter, who promptly moved in with him. After only 2 weeks, he proposed after he took her out in a canoe filled with roses and got her a Tiffany engagement ring, all purchased with his mechanic job. We were 16, by the way. A girl I went to school with told people that her aunt married a snake. I'll never forget that. I also have an ex who would vehemently deny she was cheating. I could have caught her in the act and she'd still try to convince me that she didn't do it. I now refer to her as Shaggy. A friend of mine got lucky after bragging to a girl about being an underwater firefighter. Our other friend backed him up by saying that he was an underwater welder and he had his life saved multiple times by said friend. I mean, these are both actual jobs that exist, but if anything, that wingman move kind of removes any credibility they have. Because underwater firefighters get called in for major problems, they don't just sit next to underwater welders on the off chance that one of them has an accident. In any case, more of a weird pickup than a proven compulsive liar. Was in a gaming clan once where some guy was always trying to one-up people in terms of getting all the attention in the channel. We'd talk about the boxes of Titan X GPUs at his house, or that Nvidia was working on new graphics cards that only he knew about. Then he was a pro game developer that worked on all of this stuff, and he had all of these connections in the industry despite living in the middle of West Virginia. Then he tried telling people that he had terminal illness and was going to die in a month, but people knew him in real life, and yeah. I left the group since then, so it's been a year and a half since I've heard from anyone, but his name alone used to be a running joke for telling BS stories. My friend in 3rd grade informed me that she was pregnant, and it was for that reason that her belly was sticking out. I told her that you have to have whoopee to get pregnant. She said, "Not always." She always told me that the Backstreet Boys were her cousins. I grilled her on Backstreet Boy trivia, literally just asking if she knew their names, and she couldn't answer any of it. The idea that she thought all of the Backstreet Boys were related is hilarious to me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. So, there's this guy named Michael. Michael is, as near as anyone can tell, a pathological liar. He's one of those fellows who has to trump everyone's story with one of his own, and somehow, he always winds up being an insanely attractive action hero in these stories. I've heard Michael talk about how he was issued access to a fighter jet at age 17, how he once saved the president from some plot or another, and how he had an impromptu ménage à trois with some very famous celebrity and her sister in the Sacramento River. Suffice to say, the guy isn't exactly believable, but perhaps his worst lie was one that took an entire evening to tell. In the town where I grew up, there used to be a weekly event called the Chef's Market. Since there wasn't a whole lot else to do in the area, my friends and I would frequently spend our Friday evenings there, wasting what little money we had on slabs of barbecued meat and cups of too sweet lemonade. On one such occasion, a local party coordinator had set up an inflatable stage of sorts, on which two contestants were encouraged to knock each other off low platforms using weapons that looked like rather enormous Q-tips. It seemed like a lot of fun, so I offered to pay for any of my friends who wanted to spar against me. "Oh, I can't," Michael chimed in before anyone else could talk. "It's okay," I said. "I'll pay for you, if you want." Truth be told, I was hoping he'd decline so that I could pay for one of my other friends to try it with me. Fortunately, that's exactly what happened. Michael shook his head. "No, I'm very opposed to violence unless it's absolutely necessary." "This isn't violence," one of my other friends said. "It's just fun." "You guys don't understand," protested Michael. "If I go in that ring with you, I will kill you. I won't have a choice." A few eye rolls were passed around the group. "Why's that, Michael?" someone asked. "It's by trading," he said. "Once I get into a combat state, I can't stop until I've killed someone." Now, Michael was clearly not someone that we spent much time around by choice, and none of us were too keen on talking him into an activity that he was clearly afraid of trying. My other friends and I went a few rounds, knocked each other down a few times, and figured we'd head off to find a drink. As soon as we started walking, though, Michael started into the next leg of his story. "Do you guys know why I have that trading?" he asked. "Because you're a ninja?" someone sarcastically replied. Michael nodded. "Yes, I was trained kung fu from a very young age, and I got so good that my family got run out of the last town where we lived." Nobody said anything. We certainly didn't ask him to continue, but he did anyway. "They even hatched a plot to try and get me thrown into prison. This girl broke into my house one night and tried to seduce me, but I already had a girlfriend, so I turned her away. That's when she went to the police and tried to say that I'd committed the unspeakable act on her." "How terrible," someone muttered. "Don't encourage him," hissed someone else. Michael's voice took on a very grave aspect. "Fortunately, I was friends with the owner of the hospital. He helped me after I accidentally killed my karate teacher." Someone made a comment about the difference between karate and kung fu, but Michael either didn't hear them or pressed onward anyway. "He tested the girl himself, and he found the genetic material in her hoo-ha, but it wasn't mine, and it wasn't human." He waited for a reaction. When it didn't come, he escalated even further. "That started a rumor that I was a genetically engineered super soldier because of how powerful I am. We had to leave town for my parents' safety because I couldn't always be there to protect him." Once again, nobody said anything save for a few murmurs of, yeah. Thankfully, Michael seemed to have exhausted himself for the evening until he asked one of us to pay for his dinner. No one was really surprised when he had a really insane reason for being broke. In short, a genetically engineered super soldier had to flee with his parents after being accused of both the unspeakable act and murder. And that's why he needs you to pay for his burrito. I used to work in restaurants years ago with a girl that insisted that in order to cure her brother of his fear of cats, the doctor tied him to a fence and threw cats at him until he was cured. She was like 25 and seriously thought that we all believed her. She was entertaining, to say the least, and while she drove us crazy with her stories, I do occasionally miss listening to them. My little sister had a friend in elementary school that said she had an underground pool with 100 dolphins living in it. The sister was angry when I called the girl a compulsive liar. My sister didn't draw the line until the friend said she had a cell phone. Apparently that one was unbelievable. This was in the mid-90s, by the way. I know a guy, I'll call him Phil because that's his name. He's 5'8", 280 pounds, runs the quarter mile in 8.2 seconds, bench presses 610 pounds with his bare hands, and has bowled over 3,000 perfect games in a row, so That's what we know about him so far. He was a SEAL Ranger for over 15 years, but had to leave the army because he was just too deadly, apparently, so he became a ninja until the US called him back down to hunt down Noriega. His hands are registered deadly weapons, and he'll be killed by the FDA if he ever reveals who he really is. He once went to Universal Studios to see the Conan the Barbarian show, and almost didn't make it back because they thought he was the perfect Conan, but he had to turn it down because he was going to be the next senior project manager at work. He showed me a framed picture of him as Conan, or rather him as Arnold Schwarzenegger as Conan. Oh, and that bottom right-hand corner under the picture wasn't a page number, that's how much they offered him, but without the 12 zeros. Wow, Phil sure seems like a cool, rad person who's achieved a lot. No way that any of that is bullcrap. What the hell? I love being so committed that you try to pass off a page number as literally anything else. Do compulsive liars actually think that other people are this gullible? I can understand having a compulsion to just say stuff like this, but does it also make you think everyone else is a complete drooling idiot who can't tell fact from fiction? Used to have a friend who was a pathological liar by every sense of the word. Some of his highlights include being the heir to a large corporate fortune. He said his grandmother owned a VIP box at a large commercial sports venue, that he was a personal friend of Hillary Clinton, graduated with honors from a prestigious university, which in reality he attended one semester, that he was a high-ranking employee of several political campaigns. Gloria Allred was apparently his personal lawyer. Mother was a founding member of AITA. Sister was a backup dancer for Lady Gaga. He receives a monthly special benefit from the state for being adopted. I'm 99% sure this was an EBT card, which somehow we're the heir to a large corporate fortune as well. Mother graduated Harvard Law with and is a close friend of Justice Kagan. Mind you, this is just the crap I can confirm is false. There's a much longer list of things that I'm pretty sure are false, as well as things that would be too identifying to share. Oh, I had this one friend in college. Most of his tales were these ridiculous cinematic conquests, sounding like something straight out of a badly written adult film, all of which had apparently taken place since he entered college 3 years ago. Ménage à trois with hot cheerleaders, doing the deed with a hot, older professor, doing it in public, the list just went on like that. It was obvious he took all the things that he liked in adult movies and just made up stories involving himself, and he'd only tell these stories in public because he wanted random people to hear it. Met a guy who claimed that at age 14 he worked at medieval times and was one of the knights. He claimed he was the youngest knight in the history of medieval times, and that one day when he was walking from his car wearing a full suit of armor, because apparently they let you take it home, he got struck by lightning. I was in the Navy, so I had a ton of these. Tons and tons and tons and tons. But the first guy was the one that really stole my heart. We were in boot camp together, and I don't remember his name. Jake, maybe? I don't know. He was from Iowa, where his parents were apparently millionaires because in his small town they were accountants. To all the billionaires in town. Their small Iowa town had quite a few billionaires, apparently. That's how he got money, too. He owned a dozen cars and he had 30 weapons in his collection. When he chose to join the Navy as an undesignated enlisted, he got that hookup from his uncle, who was a senator. Former senator. He spent all of his summers growing up with this guy. But this guy had died the previous year and had already forgotten his name, I guess. But they were apparently really close. That's why he got in as an undesignated seaman. Also, his other uncle, I think, was an admiral. The nukes wanted him, what with his perfect 99 on the ASVAB, and so did the SEALs. He had apparently used to train with a bunch of them, in Iowa. But his uncle got him the hookup as an undesignated seaman, so that's what he was going to do. Try everything before picking the one job he wanted. And he already had the hookup from his uncles, including the dead one whose name he can't remember, and the living one whose name he can't remember, so he was going to be stationed in Australia as an undesignated seaman. He had one guy that actually did believe all of this crap. Though I will say, the most common lie was about ASVAB scores. I don't get it, it's technically private, but everyone knows someone who has access to that info to easily prove or disprove someone's claims. I'd say the entire command knew the top and bottom 5 ASVABs at any given time without them being appropriately shifted as people moved in and out of the command. You can't lie about something that everyone knows. Yep, when I was in high school my sophomore year, this girl wrapped an ace bandage around her chest and colored on it with a red Sharpie and said that she had been shanked by MS-13. I used to work on cruise ships, and there was this stand-up comedian who was an insane liar. He told us all kinds of bullcrap about how he was once the voice of Donald Duck, but he got fired for doing an impression of Donald, climaxing that ended up going viral on the internet. He also said he'd been on Letterman. He hadn't, maybe in the audience, but never on the actual show. The best lie he told me was when we were in the crew bar. My hometown had just gotten their NHL team back, so I was proudly rocking a new Winnipeg Jets hat. He proceeded to tell me that he played for the original Winnipeg Jets in the 90s. I was like, which I lived and breathed the Jets in the 90s and I never saw your butt on any of our teams. He then goes on to say that he was originally a soccer player at St. Louis and he got drafted by the Blues when the GM was at one of his games. This, he says, was right around the time the Blues team was formed, in the 1980s. The frickin' Blues have been in the NHL since 1967. He was dead frickin' serious when he told me all of this. I just sat there in shock wondering how the frick he could possibly think I'd believe any of it. Then a few days later, he was busted in his cabin with a crap ton of white snow. So I guess I got my answer. There was a girl in middle school that would just lie about being rich. The only ones I specifically remember was that she only gave her cat Evian water and said that her dad was a doctor and drove a Porsche. I didn't care either way, but one day after school I paid attention to what car she got into. I can still see her panicked face as she realized I was watching her get into a rinky-dink Toyota Corolla. People who've had friends stab you in the back, what's the story? Made plans to go see a movie with my friends for my 16th birthday and planned it weeks in advance. Everyone bailed the day before or on the day, but I decided to go and see the movie anyway. Ran into my whole group of friends leaving the movie theater while buying popcorn. I confronted them. Yeah, a lot of hemming and hawing, with no real explanation and no apology. Still went to see my movie, Underworld, and learned a valuable lesson about people and friends. Sucked at the time, but eventually that lesson was a great birthday gift. It started the process of not showing up for a majority of things and only making brief appearances for a month or so. Then I got to play D&D with some people from jazz band and never really looked back. Best friend stopped talking to me after my dad died. Took the whole friend group with him. Apparently, I was too emotional. I was 13. Having my entire friend group walk away from me when I was in such a crappy place stuck with me forever. This was similar to my experience as well. I lost my father at 9 years old and all but one of my friends ditched me because they didn't know how to deal with a person in grief. I'm still close with the friend that stayed 21 years later. I hope everything is going well for you now. I asked 2 of my friends if they wanted to live together in college. Then one of them asked another person in our friend group if he wanted to join in as well. Then they asked another and another. And then once there were too many friends for one apartment, they dropped me out of it. No longer friends with any of them. Was kind of a wake-up call though because I definitely gave way too much of myself to those people, not knowing I was the most expendable one. It really taught me not to put others on a pedestal and respect myself more, and has since led to me developing more healthy relationships that bring me a lot of happiness. I had one friend, Ben. I was bullied by everyone at elementary school. Because Ben was worried about being bullied too when they hung out with me at school, we only played outside of school. One day, a popular kid asked to play with me during recess. I was ecstatic, until after a while they said, "You're not as bad as that Ben person said you are." And that's how I learned why I was bullied. She slept with my boyfriend because she thought she was in love with me. Wackest crap I ever did hear. Well, they do say that if you do the deed with someone, you're doing it with everyone they've ever done it with. So in a way, she might have fulfilled a goal. Sucks though. I had my 17th birthday and invited my mates to go get a drink at a bar. Everyone accepted, but no one came. After a few hours of drinking alone and phone calls not getting picked up, I saw on Instagram that they were at an electro party having a good time. Apparently they were pre-gaming without me and spontaneously decided to go to this event and forgot about me. Everyone said sorry, but it still haunts me. Don't celebrate my birthday ever since then. I once had a really sad 25th birthday. I never usually celebrate them. Most of the time I just grab 1 or 3 friends and go to a restaurant with them. But this time I wanted to celebrate a bit bigger. I invited 3 different friend groups to a barbecue in the park. I honestly have no clue how this happened, but in the end I was the butt of every joke. Everyone just made fun of me the whole time till it got really annoying and even made a "you can't sit with us, we found new friends" jokes. I had a really hard time talking to anybody because no one really paid attention to me. So most of the time I was sitting alone on my blanket and just got made fun of when I wanted to chime in on a conversation. It was the worst birthday ever, and no one understood why I was so teed off in the end. I even told them the whole evening that they were going a bit overboard with their jokes. I mean, sure, it's nice having a different friend group connect with each other, but on my expense? Screw you. That's why for my 30th birthday, I just grabbed 5 really awesome and good friends and went to the zoo. Several of my housemates decided to move to the West Coast after college. There was one who was planning on going with them that they didn't want to keep living with. They waited to tell her until after they'd driven out over spring break to look at apartments, in her car. Pretty gross, and it really messed with her. I was taking a culinary class with my buddy, and he walked behind me with a knife and didn't say anything. I stepped back and got mildly stabbed in the lower back. After 10 years of friendship, you think you know a guy. Wait, am I answering this right? I had a whole group of friends in high school who one day, out of nowhere, turned against me and brought the entire year group with them. No one spoke with me, were extremely cold for a good 6 months. I even got calls from one girl every day from a blocked number telling me to self-delete. It wasn't until a group project started and the group said the exact same thing. Wow, you're really not like how your old friends said you were. They never told me what was said, so to this day I have no idea what the heck happened here. This happened to a friend of mine. We were friends in middle school but then went to different high schools. We're nerds, so we kind of expect abuse, but what he got there was vicious. I started dating a girl from his school, and upon finding out we were friends, she said, "Why are you friends with him? He does inappropriate things with kids." Turns out he certainly didn't, he was just gay. Someone spread this rumor as a hyperbole because he came on to her brother who's a year younger. People just abandoned all reason and chose to believe the delicious gossip. Been very good friends for over 2 years. Their roommate moved out and they asked me if I wanted to move into their spare room. I was very happy to live with my good friends and I did everything I could to be the best roommate possible. After 3 weeks, they found another source of income and kicked me out. First, they offered to help me find another accommodation, but the next day they changed their mind and just told me to leave by the end of the month. It was 7 days away. They didn't speak to me ever since. When we met somewhere in town, they acted like they'd never seen me before. I have no freaking idea what I did wrong. My friends told me to grieve better after my boyfriend died. Some people are just terrible with dealing with the grieving. They're great for a little while, but at some point it just becomes an irritation whenever it's brought up. Grief gives no Fs. It'll hit you, fade, hit, fade, and then mostly settle down. Then 7 Christmases later, it shows up in a panic attack. It's different for everyone and often very different for every death. A quiet girl I made friends with would only sit with me in class just so she could go snitch about me to my ex-friends. She'd literally sit next to me for 1 or 2 classes, randomly, and then go and sit with them. I called her out on it after she came to sit next to me and told her, "Why do you even bother sitting with me when we just know you're just trying to get crap to talk about me with them? When I come back from the bathroom, you'd better go sit somewhere else." I was usually very quiet, and that was the first time I'd stood up for myself. I had one friend who honestly wasn't my favorite person because she was really manipulative. But I never said anything bad about her. I found out later she had been crap-talking me to all of our mutual friends and telling them that I did horrible things that I'd never done. Ended up essentially being pushed out of that entire friend group, and it ruined a lot of my high school experience. Village gossips. Personally, I'm just happy I'm not part of that miserable group anymore. As one wise man said, empty cans rattle the most. I had a best friend that I knew for 16 years. She got pregnant and her parents tried to kick her out. Her parents wanted her to get a termination, but she refused. One of our high school friends told me someone should push her down a flight of stairs. I told her that's a very bad idea and defended my best friend. The next day, the principal came by my class to ask me if I could attend a meeting about something important. If I didn't attend, I was going to be expelled. When I arrived at the meeting, our shared friend claimed I was going to shove my best friend down a flight of stairs. My best friend had believed her. We stopped talking after that. Oosh. Well, she might have eventually found out how reliable that other friend was if that's the one she chose to keep around. Stressful situation for her. I guess the lapse in judgment isn't down to cruelty. We, my husband and I, had a friend that we helped get back on his feet. Paid off some tickets he had, got his license reinstated, hooked him up with a solid connection for a reasonable, well-running car to replace his beater, and gave him a place to live and a job, automotive repair. He decided it was a better choice to tell all our customers we were overcharging them. Spoiler, we weren't, and he'd do the jobs cheaper if they'd bring it to him at his house. This was a short time after he moved out of our house after never repaying anything he owed us. Not that we'd asked. It really broke my heart. Some will take as much as they possibly can. Now he stops by occasionally like nothing ever happened. It's been years now, but some crap doesn't heal right. My wife said she needed some time to herself, so she went to stay at her mum's for a while. One day, I went to pick up my kids and walked in on her and my best friend doing the deed. Turns out it had been going on for a while and she knew him before she knew me, which I had no clue about. To clarify a few things. 1. When I said the affair had been going on for a while, I mean for several months before I found out. This was after my second son was born. I have no doubt as to whether my kids are actually my own or not. 2. Yes, they are now my ex-wife and ex-best friend. 3. This happened nearly 16 years ago now. It was a very dark period of my life, but I'm great now. I got 2 great kids out of the relationship. I wouldn't have met my wife if this hadn't happened. Also, I believe I'm a stronger person having gone through the whole ordeal. 4. Just know that if you're going through something horrible in your life and your heart and mind are broken, there is hope for things to get better. It just takes time. This would prompt me to conduct a DNA test on the kids. I hope the results don't break your heart. I was worried about that years ago, but both are now teenagers and clearly resemble myself and their mum. Had a good bud of mine who's the godfather of my son living with me and my wife. I travel a lot for work and was out of the country for about 6 months in the Middle East. Came back and found out she was preggers with twins and that they weren't mine. Best friend for 8 years, started sleeping with my girlfriend, later wife, a week after I introduced them. Took 6 years after my son was born to find out that they'd meet up a few times a month. Was a chance he wasn't mine. Luckily, he is. The problem is that the closeness you have to the person blinds you to the idea that they could do anything so terrible. My best friend is one of the smartest guys I know, always on top of it when someone is being the least bit cool or he's getting screwed. Then his wife swore that she must have gotten a transmissible disease from a toilet seat. He believed her and even got mad at his good friends for saying she could be lying until he caught her cheating 6 months later. Love makes fools of us all, I guess. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Years ago, when I did a health sciences undergraduate degree, most of the cohort was determined to get into medical school. Our medical school program mainly accepted students from only our competitive undergraduate course, due to subject prerequisites. We all knew each other and were friendly, hanging out together and forming study groups. Many of my friends were great. We shared tips, resources, practiced exams and interviews together, but there were a handful who really wanted to get into medical school, and since the program ranks applicants mainly based on undergraduate results, the better your friends perform, the lower your ranking is for selection. So near application time, some of us would head off to the university library to borrow our textbooks, to find chapters or page numbers that the lecturer mentioned would be on the exam. And they would be ripped out. You'd go and find another library copy of the textbook and that page would be ripped out too. All of them totally removed in a hurry. I didn't believe that someone from our cohort did it until interview practice began. Students began obtaining copies of the questions from previous years and lying when others asked if they had it. I saw someone give a terrible, awful interview answer, and the other student would give them glowing feedback and inform them they should say that, word for word, during the interview. It was a crap show, and a lot of relationships fell apart or were never the same again. In the UK, I've heard of similar practices for pupilages. Not sure if that's the right word, but trainee barristers. One girl got offered 2 places and was discussing with us which one to take, and her best friend left the room. Turned out she'd called one of them pretending to be her friend and calling to decline a place and recommend herself. Fortunately, they found out, but sadly this was apparently common enough for them to be familiar with this kind of scam. I booked a table for 6 people to watch a sports event at a bar. I told them so. All 5 friends said, "Okay, we'll be there." No one shows up or even has the decency to call or text that they weren't coming. This just happened to my 11-year-old sister, BBBS, and I was heartbroken for her. She had a slumber party planned with about 4 friends and she'd been talking about it for over a month. Halloween is her favorite and she had all these cute, not too scary slumber party plans and crafts we'd made a couple of weeks ahead of time that had truth or dares in them. None of them came. They all forgot to tell their parents. I suggested maybe next year she makes paper invitations that her friends can give their parents so they for sure know about it. Turns out that's exactly what she did and they still messed it up somehow. Ugh. My friend told me they weren't doing anything for their birthday. On the day of their birthday, photos appeared on Facebook of them out with the rest of our friends. They're not my friends anymore. Frick, man. One of my most painful memories from elementary school was when I saw one of my friends showing other kids pictures from her birthday party that happened the weekend prior. Almost all of my good friends were there having a blast with her, except me, obviously. She seemed remorseful when she realized that she forgot to invite me, but we were never as close after that, and we were pretty good friends with each other, too. A woman I thought was my friend. We worked together for years and our kids were friends. I helped her and her husband out when he was having mental health problems. She was in my sister's wedding party. Appeared in court as a witness for my ex-wife in her bid to gain full custody. Thankfully, she failed and I now have custody of my kids. I haven't spoken to my friend since. A guy who seemed like a good mate when it was just us, and then as soon as there was someone else or a group, he took the mickey out of me and tried to make me the butt of all his jokes. Even worse if there were girls around. After a while, I called him out on it and he was just like, "Dude, it's just a joke." But I was done with him after that. I saw him randomly earlier this year after years of no contact, and it was amicable, and we caught up a bit on how we were getting on with our own lives. And while he's grown up and become a bit more grounded, there's been no intention of rebuilding a bridge. I think if I ever met someone that has that side to their personality, I'd drop them like a hot potato. I think we all have at least one nasty experience with people like this growing up. Teens are gnarly. I hope that these experiences with grown adults are fewer and further between. My D-bag of a brother did this to his best friend of all time. After about 6 years of this, his friend couldn't stand it anymore and cut my brother off. My brother is so arrogant he still can't see the problem. Why didn't he just keep being my victim? That's the way things were. It was his place. I don't get it. In 2014, I woke up January 1st in horrible pain. I ended up needing an emergency surgery to remove my gallbladder. I was a single mum to 2 kids under 5 and had just moved back to my hometown after living out of state. We'd had to leave a really crappy living situation and had only been back about a month, and I hadn't found a job at that point. I'd had a really close family friend who had been living with me before I'd moved back, and he ended up homeless, so I bought him an $80 bus ticket and got him back to our hometown and let him stay with me for a few days. He quickly found another place to stay, but we'd invited him to my youngest son's 2nd birthday, which is the 6th of January. I was like 4 days out from surgery at this point and could barely make it down the stairs at this point, so he offered to go and pick up pizza and cake for my son and me. We didn't have a huge party or anything. I was on food stamps and had cash assistance, since my son's dad was not involved at all and he didn't pay child support. Even so, I offered for him to get himself a small pizza to take back to the girl he was staying with, since her and her kids couldn't make it over. So the party goes great and everyone has a good time, especially both my kids. A few days later, my grandma was going to do grocery shopping for me, so I go to get my card and realize it's not there. I never got it back from that guy, and I forgot he had it since I was on pain meds from surgery. I tried calling him like 5 times and he didn't answer, so I got to my account online to check my balance and he took everything. I had like $600 in cash, paid my rent and brought my kids the things they needed, and then I had about $750 in food stamps. All of it was gone. He let the girl he was staying with convince him to steal the money from me. I'd only used the money to buy the bus ticket and the pizza and cake for my son since I'd been in hospital for the first 4 days of the year, and only home for 2 after that. It's still to this day the most intentionally messed up thing anyone's ever done to me, mostly because he was such a huge FU to my kids. Like, who steals from a single mum recovering from a life-saving surgery on her kid's birthday? Especially after I helped him, like holy crap. Growing up in the same church and met my friend and her family when I was 14. We grew up together, hung out, and our families would be together all the time. Fast forward many years and I'm dating a guy that I fell in love with for almost 3 years at the time. He went to North Dakota to the oil fields for work. I went to visit him and could tell something was off a bit. Took the train from my town to Williston, 22 hours to get there. Visited him for 5 days and on the last day he gets up and goes to the shower. I grab his phone. We had an open policy with each other that either could be on each other's phones. I found the emails between my friend and him. My family still hangs out with her family and her. I refuse to be around or speak to her. My best friend since 4th grade, called her my soul sister. I genuinely was so grateful to have what I thought our friendship was. She fell on hard times and got weirdly religious and stopped working while going to a private university. I was always there for her, shoulder to cry on, visited her all the time because she didn't have any friends and I knew she was lonely. I helped her with groceries and rent, helped her family out. One day she came over, and after buying her groceries, she told me that a higher power had been telling her to cut me off for 2 years and she had to listen. Now she wants to be friends again. It's a hard nope from me, dog. I had some friends who were always talking crap about me. Found out from another good friend. And one day, I came to school in my brand new jeans that cost around €150, and they put glue on my chair while I was in the bathroom. I sat on it. I asked which of them did it, and none of them said a word. We went to the principal's office, and these pieces of crap had the gall to say that I put it there to get them in trouble. Their parents were called, and I earned around €200 for a new pair of jeans. In 7th grade, she wrote a 10-page letter on all the reasons I should self-delete, and had all but one of my friends sign an agreement after I confided in her that I felt like something was wrong with me. Early undiagnosed depression, go figure. The day she gave it to me was arguably the worst day of my life at that point because my parents had told my sister and I that they were considering divorce and my grandmother had died. My parents ended up solving their issues and are happier than ever. I've been in therapy for a while and it's had wonderful results along with a pretty good mood stabilizer. I'm happier and healthier than I've ever been, and honestly the best thing for me was to completely cut her out of my life. Everyone that signed an agreement has long since cut contact with her and apologized to me. Just happened today, actually. I threw a housewarming party for myself and invited about 20 people over. It's been 5.5 hours and no one has shown up or bothered to call. I specified no gifts and supplied about $250 worth of food and drinks that'll go to waste now. My best friend begged my girlfriend to go south of the border on him. That was pretty brutal. F you, Ben. A friend stole my Mortal Kombat 2 strategy guide in 3rd grade. I never forgave him. Eat crap, Cameron, doo-doo head. Friend was really close with me and my girlfriend. Friend was my girlfriend's confidant while we were dating. I trusted that friend because he was a good guy up to that point. Friend was constantly pinning her against me and making bigger deals out of small stuff, saying I was mistreating her by not being with her constantly because I was working a full-time job while in school. The girlfriend cheated on me with her friend. He tried to turn everyone against me. The only person who still associates with that friend is the girlfriend, and they're getting married in the next few months. What was one rule at your office that ruined everything? I worked for a place that did RMA repairs on PCs. Most of our clients were businesses like hospitals and factories. Anyway, as I was touring the workshop during my orientation, the guy taking me around took me to the QA department. Once all builds or repairs were made, they were sent to the QA department for a final inspection before going out to the customer. The guy jokingly said, "We used to pay the QI guys bonuses for every mistake they found on the build." I started laughing. The only problem was it wasn't a joke. They actually paid bonuses to the QA people who found mistakes on builds. For anyone not familiar with the internal workings of a PC, it could take less than 3 seconds to completely render a computer inoperable. Hell, you could loosen a connection just by inspecting it. Luckily, that policy ended before I was hired. I mean, can you imagine giving someone a bonus for finding screw-ups when it would take almost no effort to make a screw-up and then claim you found it? New manager got rid of the sofa in the break room so people couldn't nap in their hour-long lunch break. No one was oversleeping or taking the mickey with it, but it was a good option to have on a tough day. A guy who liked green herbs started sleeping in other places, including in between the walls in the warehouse. To clarify where he'd go, we'd find him in between the walls and shelves. It was a DIY store that had been something else years before, so there were random partition walls and oddly laid out shelving units everywhere. A real crap show of a store layout. He had quite a few places to hide in and nap. That's when we started losing him and couldn't find him as he'd go into a deeper sleep and was less likely to be disturbed. He didn't lose his job somehow. That place had a hard time hiring. We got a new manager for our office. She was an outside hire and was trying to prove herself quickly, and she was obsessed with efficiency. So her first week here, she sent us out this very rudely worded email about employees eating at our desks. We have a very small break area, 4 tables, and we have about 300 employees here, and that we all had to stop eating at our desks because it was not efficient to eat and try to work at the same time. Through a coordinated effort by some of the more sassy people at the office, they all had their lunches at the same time and filled the break room with about 90 people. Elbow to elbow, and they all ate standing up. Literally the next day after that happened, she sent out a follow-up email saying that we could eat at our desks, but she advised us to take a break from our work from time to time. It was pretty funny. Good old malicious compliance. There's nothing like it. Whether it's sticking it to obnoxious customers or your superiors, it brings me such joy. At a former job, software development, there was a foosball table. People would play reasonably often, but just one game to take a break. One day, management came down to the software engineering floor and saw people playing foosball in the middle of the afternoon. They declared no foosball until 4:30 p.m. That ended up making it so that everybody knew when there would be other people wanting to play foosball, so it was much easier to find somebody willing to play and significantly increased the amount of foosball played at work. I'm a programmer. On a previous job, the developers and teams were measured by the number of feature requests that they completed. We figured out how to subdivide everything to blow it up into the maximum number of feature requests possible. A manager might request a new report. We set up separate feature tickets for Create Button, Make Button Blue, Make Button Respond when clicked, implement business logic, display results in grid, allow sorting of grid, and so on. We'd subdivide a one-day task into 20 one-hour tasks. Our management loved it. Our team looked 20 times as productive despite deliberately slowing ourselves down with red tape. Ugh, so accurate it hurts, especially the management loved it part. Malicious compliance mixed with scope creep. My company, as part of its alcohol policy, said you shouldn't drink for at least 4 hours before coming to work. When engineers got called about production problems over the weekend, they'd all just had a beer, but could be there in about 4 or 5 hours. I'm a flight attendant. Rule is we can't drink 8 hours before our shift. Sometimes the company will call you after you've just done working to do more flying as they don't have anyone else. Or we might have an extra long overnight, as in get into whichever city, say at around 11 p.m. Monday, and not leave until 6 a.m. Wednesday. Sometimes they'll call us out to work some short flights on that Tuesday that we aren't working. All you have to do is answer the phone and say you just had a drink, and then you don't have to work. An insane amount of time and hand-wringing went into my office's dress code policy. When the final draft was ultimately released, every department head had a valid reason why their staff should be exempted. So the policy wound up only affecting myself and the guy that insisted on making the policy. I violate this policy on a daily basis. I used to work for a production company that employed a lot of really skilled, award-winning editors. There were producers and executives and directors, but the real money makers, the people who really made the company, were the editors, so the company was basically centered around them. The executives would always order in food for the editors, and the editors would usually eat in their offices while doing their thing. One day, the execs decided to cut paid lunches to save money. The editors all thought this was a jerk move, so they'd go out for lunch and sometimes stay out for like 3 hours. There was nothing the company could do, really, because these editors were top of their game, and if Warner Bros. Heard that the editors they always used had left, they might leave too. So the company couldn't do anything. They saved maybe $15 per person per day, but lost like 4 hours per person per day as well. When trimming a budget, you may want to remove things that are the most expensive and provide the least noticeable benefit. So of course, the first thing to always go is creature comforts, which cost almost nothing and have immense impact on quality of life. I'm perpetually amazed at many companies' existence. You're assuming they want to remove the things that make sense to remove. What actually happens is they remove the easiest things to remove, basically all the low-effort, low-capital, and low-time investment things. What's the easiest thing a manager could possibly do to save money? Simply stop buying lunches for people. It takes one email and the manager can claim $50,000 annual savings on day one to their bosses. This is why layoffs that end up hurting the company financially occur. Labor is the easiest go-to when you have to cut costs quickly. Companies are starting to realize this in manufacturing at least and have been focusing on decreasing specific costs rather than fixed. Depends on your industry though. Some have very low fixed labor costs like 5 to 10%, whilst others can be higher than 50. In the 5 to 10% cases, it might actually save your company money to go and hire more people, but many people are very reluctant to do so. My old job had a draconian attendance policy in which if you were a second late, you got a half-point demerit. If you were an hour late, you got that same half-point demerit, with certain amounts of demerits meaning different kinds of warnings or termination. In addition to making for some of the most anxiety-filled employees that made dumb decisions to speed through snowstorms, it also meant if you got stuck in a traffic jam, you might as well just take your time, stop for gas, and get breakfast. The same place also had a similar policy that assured the plague spread through the whole place. Say you came to work at 7. By 9 a.m., you've got a fever and full-blown flu symptoms. If you clock out then, you get a whole-point demerit. But if you sit there coughing and shivering and infecting your coworkers for another 2 hours, till your shift was half over, you only got a half-point demerit. The sickness policy is shockingly dumb. If everyone gets sick because one person can't leave, then productivity goes down a huge amount, if not shutting down operations entirely until enough people are healthy again. I'm surprised that wasn't revoked after the first time, but some managers can't manage anything. As someone who used to work in hospitality, where when you got sick you'd be asked to come in anyway because nobody else could replace you, I can tell you what a relief it is to now work in a situation where I can choose to take a sick day or two, or just power through in our post-pandemic work-from-home environment. My dad was a corpsman with the Marines doing high desert training in the Mojave. They had a big problem with unidentified snake bites. People would get bit but not identify the snake, so it was hard to find the right antidote. So my dad got all the Marines in a room and said, "If you get bit by a snake, bring it back here so we can identify it." Not even a full week later, they had to alter the wording a bit because a Marine was bit by a rattlesnake and decided to bring it back without killing it. This man had carried the snake all the way back to base alive And the snake decided to let him know exactly how he felt about that by repeatedly biting his arm the entire time. Needless to say, that Marine went home and they made sure to hold another meeting where they told everyone to kill the snake, then bring it back. In the end, he kept the arm. They got him to the base hospital in roughly 50 minutes and gave him antivenom. He was out for 6 weeks. This was in 1995 at 29 Palms. He calls it 29 Stumps. 4th Marine Division, Reservist Marines out of Buffalo, New York. My work just recently tried to implement a new attendance policy that didn't last 24 hours. They changed it so that after 2 unexcused absences in a year, you were fired. An unexcused absence is any absence or tardiness. I think you were allowed 4 tardies. When you didn't give your boss more than 24 hours notice. Lock the doors on the HR person that came up with that. Add it to their one previous absence. Fire them, fix the policy, rehire them to teach them a lesson. Don't do anything unless directed by your boss. Any deviation from this will result in write-up and termination. This was a very literal directive from upper management that took place after an office incident. Our work is very fluid and our team alone contained 20 people. Needless to say, productivity hit unfounded lows. Yep, we had this. We couldn't even ask our managers if there was any work to be done. They just emailed us with work every hour. I ended up finishing it in like 10 minutes of the email and was bored out of my brain for the majority of the day. This is literally a labor strategy to have a strike without leaving the workplace open for scabs. And to prevent retaliation from the bosses. It's called work to rule or a rulebook slowdown. I work for a labor union representing airport catering workers, and this is a strategy we've used in the past with great success. The rules and procedures in place with the company and the unsafe, unsanitary rules the workers are expected to follow are 2 very different things. So we start implementing safety first days. The workers show up to work as normal and then spend the day following every company procedure to the letter. Productivity plummets, deadlines aren't met, and flights on major airlines leave without in-flight meals. The flyers get upset with the airline gets upset with the airport gets upset with the catering company, and the managers responsible for the poor working conditions are set directly in the crosshairs. It's been very effective. I worked for a software company that routed all sales that came to under $100,000 to inside sales, while larger orders went to outside sales teams that worked directly with the customers. This lasted until one of the inside sales guys convinced the customer that they didn't need the $2 million software and only the $100,000 upgrade. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. At one job, you could schedule vacation and give it back if your plans changed. One guy would take 2 weeks off, wait until the schedule was made for that month, then give it back. Since the schedule assumed he wasn't going to be there, he'd make up his own shifts since he was extra. This would lead to him working 11/7, showing up at 2, taking lunch, working from 4 to 6, and leaving early. He'd do this 3 or 4 times per year. My work used to have vacation and sick leave as 2 separate things. 2 years ago, they created new paid time off that merged sick leave and vacation, but everyone got the same amount of paid time off as their old vacation time. So tons of people just started coming to work sick so they wouldn't waste their vacation time. Now there are tons of people sick all of the time. Overtime is paid in free time instead of money. 3 people quit so far, more people planning to. No new hires to be found. It's probably just a matter of time before this shop closes down. My old job did something similar, but for every hour of work, you got 1 hour of paid leave, so it was better for new parents that could do extra work the days they could, and then get to leave for emergencies and still be paid. People disliked the idea at first until they found out they could work 4 days per week for only 2 hours of extra work per day. We started finding what we called Weekend Wednesday. That way we had a day off in the middle of the week and worked only 2 days in a row. I worked as a graphic designer, by the way, so as long as we were finished on deadline, the boss didn't care. Yep, working on the basis of finished objectives is a terrific way to motivate creative work. I speak from experience, and the better you understand the capacity of your workers, the more efficient objectives you can set. We created this thing called the safety bonus. It was one of 4 possible bonuses people could get. The original version of it said that anyone that was accident-free would get a bonus, so people stopped reporting their accidents. We had to rework it to an accident bonus causing property damage. We set up another safety award for those who filed their safety reports in a timely manner with clear print and full details. IT department changed how work is given out and time is accounted for. Had to fill out daily timesheets that accounted for every 15-minute section of time with a summary of what you've worked on. Anyone that needed IT help had to go through one person. The problem is that the one person giving out work had no clue who had what skills. The timesheets were a waste, we had to stop and report what we were working on. Classic micromanagement. Within months, the entire IT staff left except for one guy. Don't micromanage when the job market is full of other jobs. I worked at a company that blocked every single website except for the one that we used for work. They then hired a new cleaning lady who couldn't speak English. We tried to look up a Spanish to English dictionary, but it was all blocked. This was pre-smartphone as well, so basically she just hung out all day since nobody knew what to have her do or even where the supplies were kept. I work for a large telecom corporation. Corporate HR instituted a new mobile phone and tablet policy for its field techs, which basically stated no electronic devices are to be in the cab of our vehicles. Not even if you're a passenger. When corporate HR sets the rules, they're followed. We even had local supervisors searching the trucks as we left the shop. So no biggie, we follow the rules. As time goes on, supervisors and dispatch get increasingly frustrated that they can't get a hold of their field techs. Go figure. This policy lasted dang near 6 months before they scrapped it. I've got to say it was a glorious 6 months. So peaceful. I was stationed aboard the USS Harry S. Truman from 02 to 05. At one point during the deployment, the Capitan found a candy wrapper in a P-way. What's the obvious solution to finding trash? G-Dunk, snacks and sodas from vending machines were only to be consumed on the mess deck. Anyone caught eating candy anywhere else on the ship would be put on report. Now, it's not like we organized a boycott, but the only reason to buy something from the vending machines would be to eat it elsewhere. If you're going to eat on the mess deck, might as well hit a chow line. 3 days of zero sales from the machines, and the supply officer talked some sense into the captain. I work in a manufacturing facility and wanted my shop supervisors to be more engaging with the operators. The supervisors had a bad habit of paging operators to the blue room, their office, to answer questions. This is obviously not ideal because it pulls an operator off the line and it impacts our efficiency. I sat the supervisors down and explained to them the situation and made it clear I don't want them paging anyone to the blue room anymore. They all nodded their heads and seemed to be agreeing and understanding. Now they page operators to the supervisor office. Work added the option to clock in or out from a mobile app. It lasted maybe 2 weeks. I worked for a tuxedo chain in the US Midwest for years. During prom season a few years back, a new policy in how we answered the phones came through. The greeting was, "Thank you for calling, company name, sales and rental, suits and tuxedos, where we can save you some cha-ching on your prom tuxedo today." Now, say that out loud a few times and realize how much bloody time it takes to say it on the phone each time it rings, all day, every day. Several of us senior managers refused to say it, 1 because it sounded stupid, and 2 because it took an eternity to say and we'd often get interrupted halfway through. Our office would call each store, 16 locations, and make sure we were saying it, and then threatened to fire us if we didn't. Needless to say, we took our defense to the owner of the company and he nixed it pretty quickly. Not quite a workplace, but around 2009 or 10, my city implemented new water-saving laws that said you could only water your lawns on Tuesdays and Thursdays and started enforcing fines on anyone watering their lawn not on the approved days. Well, summer turns to fall, the rainy season hits, and water mains across the city suddenly started bursting. Whatever could be causing this mass failure of our water infrastructure? Local university did a study and sure enough, the Tuesday and Thursday watering rule had put a massive strain on the water mains and sewer lines and caused them to fail across town. The city's attempt to save water backfired with mass flooding and expensive repairs. At the advice of the university, they switched it to odd numbers water Monday to Wednesday, even numbers water Tuesday, Thursday. It's several years later and they're still repairing the damage in places. We had a new manager that decided everyone had to be in at 9 a.m. and couldn't understand why IT were allowed to come in late. So all came in at 9 a.m. and stopped working evenings and weekends, which meant customer-facing servers being out all weekend because we couldn't be around to fix them. That guy was an idiot though. He told our best salesman to his face he thought he was overpaid, so the salesman promptly resigned, which probably cost the company more than his annual salary in lost sales. Why do guys like this always seem to end up in office management? Is it nepotism? It's nepotism, isn't it? Surely their amount of crazy wrongness can't get through a serious series of interviews. Oh, who am I kidding? Worked at a branch of a credit union. We had to recognize our workers whenever they did something good. Manager made us do this with a stuffed animal whale as if to say, "Whale done." I know. Ugh, like we were kids. Well, we decided to act like children since we were already being treated as such, so 2 weeks later our manager found the whale in the back room, hanging from an extension cord. We have a policy here that any expenditure over $500 must be pre-approved via a series of forms explaining why the thing is needed, with no exceptions. The forms are fairly annoying to fill out, change all the time, and it takes the people who review them quite a while to actually approve or deny your spending. So we all do our damnedest to keep purchases under $500. It's common practice to take one big purchase and just split it into several smaller ones to save the effort of filling out the paperwork. Same money spent, no forms filed. The no exceptions part is also somewhat problematic since it snags routine stuff like printer toner and paper. So we have to waste time filling out the form and they have to waste time reviewing and approving it. I worked at a place that very generously gave us full pay if we missed more than 3 scheduled days in a row due to sickness. The end result was what we called 72-hour flu. Literally no one ever called in for 1 day or 2. If someone was out sick, you could count on seeing them in 3 days' time. As a bit of a background, at my job there are unionized field workers and non-union office workers. I'm one of the latter. Recently, the union guys got a new rule where they're allowed to leave 30 minutes early if they don't take a lunch break. This backfired in 2 ways. First, all of the union guys leave 30 minutes early. It wouldn't really be an issue if some of them stayed until the normal time, but now when something needs to get down during the last 30 minutes of our normal hours, it pretty much ends up being overtime for someone every time. Second, since the union guys don't come back to the building for lunch anymore to clock out, it's been a lot more annoying to coordinate tasks with them if you need them to do something else in the second half of the day. It's little stuff, but it's definitely impacted productivity. Ironically, they still take a lunch break, they just try to pass it off as one of their union-mandated 15-minute breaks. My office is next to the personnel director's, and I hear him have to chew someone out over this almost daily. It's like those guys don't realize that there's a GPS in their truck that shows they were at Taco Bell for 30 minutes. They banned the word triggered, so everyone started saying activated. Get air quality monitoring for any project involving asbestos material. The problem is that we have a lot of projects which involve only a few holes drilled to mount a piece of equipment, and there's already a simple and cheap method which we know negates the risk of asbestos getting released. Forcing us to do air monitoring effectively doubles the cost of those products. It didn't take them long for that policy to get reversed. I worked for a company that met every single issue with a threat of gross misconduct. For those who don't know, gross misconduct gives the company the right to dismiss staff without notice, but that doesn't mean that you can just declare gross misconduct for everything and get out of your obligations. The best one I can remember was when they were having problems with lorries parking in the road outside and tried to get the council to make it no parking. The council duly came and took a look and noted that several cars belonging to employees were parked on the road, so, you guessed it, parking in the road, off the company's property, and perfectly legally was to be treated as gross misconduct. There were many other examples, probably 1 a month, none of which were ever executed. It got so that the whole thing became a joke and nobody took anything they said seriously. What happens to people after they win long-term prizes in competitions? A neighbor won $500 a week for life. He quit his job, divorced his wife, and moved into a small apartment across town where the rent was cheap and now he almost never leaves. He has everything delivered to his house from Amazon. Living the dream. My older cousin won $5,000 a month for life. It ruined him. He got all paranoid about people only wanting to be around him because he had money. We live in a rural, fairly low-wage area, so that's a lot of money to some people. If you ever mentioned it to him, he just stopped talking to you. He's pretty much a loner now with almost nothing to show for it. That's kinda scary. Why doesn't he move? This is where his mother lives, and he's not the type to venture out into the world. One of my friends won a $5,000 a week for life prize in the New York lottery a few years back. It's actually only for 40 years, but that's plenty of time to save for retirement and live a long, happy life. He's doing well because he isn't acting like a lotto winner. It's as if it was the social security he was receiving previously. He's disabled. He still has his friends, too. It pretty much went as best as possible. I once won a year of free groceries. They gave me 52 $100 gift cards to use any way I wanted. I was single and ate and drank like a gosh darn king that year. Nobody went hungry when I was around. I won free toilet paper for a family for life, which is $62 a month. I give them to a homeless shelter. Do you give it to them because it's full of bums? Web developer here. I made a website for a local pizza chain. The owner paid me, then asked for support. I gave him a price, $75 an hour, and he suggested free pizza for life instead. I took it. I've enjoyed excellent quality free pizza about 10 times since 2006. He's had me do about an hour's worth of maintenance. I just walk into one of his stores, order a pie, and when they ask for payment, I say, "Call Tom." They do, they talk, and then they hand me the pizza. It's kind of cool, actually. It sounds like it's only free pizza for you for Tom's life. Once he dies, they'll have no way to confirm it's free. Well, that story was written 9 years ago, so I'm not sure if Tom's pizza chain is still going. Honestly, good on the developer for not fully taking advantage of the place. I won free movies from Blockbuster for a year. It ended up only being one rental per week. After a couple of weeks, I realized it was just a coupon for one free rental and I used it as often as I needed. Eventually, I modded my original Xbox and started renting multiple games a day and copying them to my hard drive. I killed the Blockbuster. I once won a year's supply of calendars from a local gift shop. They gave me one calendar worth $2.99. That's frickin' brilliant. I got, quote, free pizza for a year. 12 pizzas. I got 12 pizzas. It was about a month ago and I've used around 4 of them already. It's not gonna last a year. I got free Oreos for life. I won an Oreo stacking contest when I was 10. I'm 21 now and glad to say that I don't have diabetes. I won free bagels from a bagel shop for a year. It was good for 13 bagels, 2 loaves of bread, and 2 tubs of cream cheese and spread each month. I tried 3 different locations and none of the managers believed that the voucher I won was legitimate at their store. They all gave me different reasons for why they wouldn't accept my voucher. Okay, this one makes me angry. Like, what the frick? They probably throw out more spoiled product than that every day and they won't honor your damn coupon? I won a year's supply of dog food when I was 10 and tried to convince my mum that it was the perfect time to finally get a dog, as it must be a sign. We didn't get a dog. I gave the vouchers to my neighbor. My parents were in the first 50 people at a new car wash place and got a free car wash for life. I'm convinced your parents are unknowingly partaking in a laundering scheme. The car wash is a front to launder money, but they need to make it look like people use the car wash in order to report high cash incomes. So they give out vouchers for free car washes to make it look like they have a lot of customers, but really they're just stuffing the registers with dirty substance money. Apparently, I made a Breaking Bad reference, but I haven't got that far yet, I'm only on season 2. Thanks for the spoilers. I entered a radio competition in the 90s for free music every month for a year. I didn't win that, but I won the consolation prize, which was a copy of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. We already had a copy of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill, by the way. A rep from the station told me they'd mail it out on the 15th. Well, it arrived, but it never stopped arriving. On the 15th of every month, a copy of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill would show up in the mail. This happened till we had about 6 copies of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. I called and asked the radio station if they could send something else besides Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill, but they did not. They just corrected their error. Later that year, my sister got a birthday present from one of her friends. When she opened it, it was a copy of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. I won free iced coffees for a year from Dunkin' Donuts, but instead they sent $500 in gift cards. I'm not mad. Interestingly enough, my girlfriend also won the exact same contest. 3-day contest, and she won the first day and I won the third and final day. 1 free scoop of ice cream a week from the local ice cream place. This was for winning an ice cream eating contest. Yum! A family friend frantically brought a scratch off while fleeing a road rage driver. She was telling the clerk to call the police on a parked car that had followed her to the gas station. She now gets $3K a week and works because she wants to, not because she has to. Every gift she gives now comes with a lotto ticket. Last week I went in to buy a specific lottery number for like $2, but then the guy ended up saying something that I couldn't quite hear, that I agreed to. He printed me off like one of every lotto ticket. It cost me over $20. I was positive that I would win though, because I never intended on buying the ticket, and that's exactly when I feel like you'd have the highest chance. I lost it all. £40,000 per year for life on a £10 National Lottery scratch card. It was that or $1 million up front. I just turned 21 at the time, so my dad made me take the annuity because I just spunk the $1 million in a couple of years left to my own devices. Now it's good. I take care of my mortgage every year, so my salary is just for me and my family. We get a nice couple of holidays a year, but we don't live to excess. 27 years old now, so we'll see if I reach over 1 million over the next 40 or 50 or 60 years. My friend won free lunch for a year at a school fundraiser, but he had to enter in his account number so they could at least document it. He was promptly given a limit on how much he could have. My neighbor won $1,000 a week for life on a lottery scratch-off ticket. I haven't seen him around recently, but he lived at his childhood home with his parents for a while and owned 2 Corvettes. He also loved dogs and would always stop me to pet my dog when I would walk by. He was always a nice guy who seemed to be smart with his winnings. I won a year of free Uber, the on-demand car service for those unaware, for pretty much all of 2014. I used it a lot, to and from work, the airport, in many different cities, took my friends out to the bars, to the beach, anywhere, met a lot of interesting drivers. Paid taxes on it this year because it counted as income, but it was definitely worth it. The contest was at a college bowl game that Uber sponsored. I had to catch the most passes in 35 seconds, which were thrown to me from NFL WR Tavern Austin. I beat my opponent by 1 catch. I received a fixed amount of Uber credit per month, so it was actual cash value that counted as income. Hence, I received a $10.99 MISC. However, I was glad to pay the tax considering the value I received. The narrator wonders if you'd be taxed regardless of how much you actually used it if you're just being given credit per month. I guess you could just make a point of taking an Uber everywhere. Screw fitness and fresh air. I won a year's supply of Nestlé sweets and chocolates in a quiz on the radio when Toy Story 2 came out. You had to answer 3 questions about Toy Story, then you got entered into a draw to either go to Space Camp in Cape Canaveral or Cowboy Camp in Arizona. But you got the chocolate for just getting on the radio. I got the 3 questions right, but some other kid won the draw. Then the chocolate just arrived in one big shipment. Huge boxes of it. It was literally incredible. Then my mum made me bring it into school and share it out amongst everyone in my year. A few kilos of chocolate and I hardly saw any of it. Ungrateful little jerks ate it all in minutes. I'm still bitter. My family won free KFC for a year when I was in the 8th grade. We got a 30-piece family bucket each month, but had to pay for everything else. It was pretty decent. A grocery store chain had a "Win a year's worth of bananas" contest a couple of years ago. I had to watch a video about how they store their bananas and then answer a question. I thought, what the hell, my kid loves bananas, and entered. And I won. They sent me a gift card for the equivalent of a year's worth of bananas. $300. We spent most of it on meat. Totally worth it. I feel like maybe you won because you were the only one who entered. The sister of my friend won a car when she got a special Oreo in a packet. You could win different prizes depending on what your special Oreo said, like trip or car or whatever. Nabisco came to our school, we had a big pep rally thing, they gave the girl, who was like 13, a new VW Beetle filled with packages of Oreos. Everyone at the school got a pack of double stuff Oreos. They'd just come out. It was awesome. The girl's parents sold the car and started a college fund. Anyone who went around to visit got tons of free Oreos. I think they eventually just donated hundreds of packets to a food bank. That's a pretty awesome story. Most people who win cars full of food just end up in a car crash and with diabetes. Free Chick-fil-A for a year. Just had to be one of the first 100 people at a new store. It's pretty good. Yes, they do this at every Chick-fil-A, and no, I'm not in your city. I read an article for college about lottery winners in Sweden, and gosh darn does it sound difficult on your social life. Friends of the winners felt like if they were buying food and looking for deals, or being sensible with their money, that they should relax and not worry too much, you have loads of money. Also, that the winners should pay for the meals and drinks just because they were better off. But the kicker was, when the lottery winners spent too much on something or did anything out of the ordinary with the winnings, the friends told them not to be careless with the money and to smarten up. Basically, a vicious circle for the winners where they were doomed if they do and doomed if they don't. Any similar experiences for lotto winners out there? Simple solution, just make sure you don't have any friends. I'm almost there. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Every now and then I get lucky enough to be the 1 millionth visitor to a website. I'm still waiting to collect around 30 iPads. I have a friend who won the Set for Life Scratch and Win Lotto. You get $1,000 a week, tax-free for 25 years. So yeah, about $52,000 per year. It's a 1 in 880,000 chance to win. He was offered a lump sum of $1 million, $300,000 less than the total prize over time, and he turned that down. He went to school for a few years until he was basically sick of it all. These days, he just spends his time drawing anime. He doesn't leave his house. He doesn't want to hang out with anyone, and he seems to just whittle away his money on impulse Amazon purchases. He has another 15 years or so worth of the lottery. He's been unemployed for the last 10 years. When he runs out of money, everyone pretty much sees that he will be royally screwed. My grandfather won the lottery for $2 million. He died 2 years later to prostate cancer. My mum was the recipient for the remaining 18 years of $80,000 a year after taxes. That time period has now expired. When I was younger, my brother won a 7-Up bottle cap contest which either allowed you to appear on TV or get a pair of 7-Up boxers. He chose the boxers. Good choice. TV is for suckers. I won the boxers too and they never came in. I just frickin' remembered right now. Not me, but my brother was hit by a car when he was 7 and my parents had a killer insurance policy on him. He gets $7,000 a month for the rest of his life and got $1.2 million when he was 25. Since he was 15, he's been addicted to smack, been in jail 6 times for violent crimes, one of which very nearly killed a guy, and has 5 children with 5 different mothers. Because of the kids, he pays almost all of his settlement money in child support every month and has to work as a dishwasher at a crappy diner to get by. The $1.2 million was spent long ago on substances, cars he destroyed, and parties he threw for his friends. A friend of an acquaintance won $2,000 a week for 20 years or something. He spends it mostly on smack. His smack dealer is the real winner. No taxes at all. In middle school, I was in a science class that won a contest for free M&Ms. The teacher got all of our information to make sure we all got our share after it got sorted out. As it was approaching summer break, none of us ever got our M&Ms, and I can only assume the teacher ate them all himself and won himself some diabetes. Years after World War II, the German government began paying reparations of sorts to victims' families for the atrocities that had befallen certain people. I don't know what it used to be, but once a year we get something like $14 in the mail. It's a bit odd. I'm not sure this can be considered a win on balance given what your family had to go through to be awarded this $14 per year. Good lord. Also, apparently the German government pays out billions per year this way in total. Who knew? I won free Applebee's for a year, which turned out to be $600 in gift cards. Kinda lame, spent most of it on beer. Free beer is never lame, young grasshopper. I mean, it's better than the food at Applebee's. You remember when Snapple had that Win Nothing promotion? I was with my girlfriend at a restaurant and opened one. Under the cap it said, "You win, no thirst." I thought to myself, duh, I'm drinking one right now. I thought it was a gag, tossed the bottle and went home. But for some reason it bugged me. I looked it up online and sure enough I'd won a lifetime supply of Snapple, and my clueless butt threw away that cap. If it makes you feel any better, I threw away a nice LCD-sized screen in the McDonald's trash. It was a World Cup promotion in Germany in 2006. You had to have 2 tickets. One had the left half, the other had the right half. I had one half and the new ticket was the other half. I thought it was the same half I had, so I pitched it. It wasn't the same half. I still have the other half of the winning pair sitting on my bookshelf to remind me of the one and only time I ever won anything, and I threw it away. Years ago, M&Ms were having a contest where you could win something like $10,000 a year for the rest of your life if you opened a special pack of M&Ms. I was at work one day, opened a pack of peanut M&Ms at my desk. They had bits of other color shells stuck to the outside of all the candies. I looked at them, thought to myself, this is weird, and then ate them and threw the package away. In the next couple of days, I saw a commercial letting me know I'd screwed myself out of some serious cash. The girl sat across from me thought it was hilarious. My question is, did I lose my one chance at something glorious, or is there something still in the cards for me? I remember there being an M&M's contest when I was a kid, where if you found one grey M&M in your bag, you would win some astronomical amount of money, or something like that. My brother and I informed our dad, and the 3 of us promptly went to the corner store to pick up a couple of bags. We were chowing down on our M&Ms and keeping a sharp eye out for any grey pieces. Suddenly, my dad holds one up and says, "Oh look, a grey one." My brother and I promptly lose our minds until Dad goes, looks pretty tasty though." He pops it into his mouth. The sound of the grey M&M crunching between his teeth sounds distinctly like the shattering of our dreams. His maniacal cackling was drowned out by our distraught wails. Turns out if you suck the food coloring off the brown M&Ms, they turn grey. Monster Energy was having a competition at my college, and they were for some reason having it at the new dorms that hadn't opened yet. Well, I happened to be touring the dorms on room selection day and had a nice conversation with the guys at the table about Fallout 3, which had come out 5 months prior. Because I killed their loneliness, they gave me about 100 entries into a contest for free Monster Energy for a year. Well, only about 30 or so people had entered at that point, so I figured why the heck not, and filled them all out right there. Of course, I won, but the catch was we got all the monsters at once. So I was given 365 cans of Monster. Things did not go well from there. I drank myself sick on Monster just because it was free and the school's tap was horrible. One of my roommates drank so much Monster that he had heart palpitations and had to go to the emergency room. We did make some awesome can pyramids though, which was pretty fun. I won a year's worth of chocolate. I'm not a huge fan of chocolate, I'm more of a savory person myself, so I was expecting my winnings to last well over a year. It ended up lasting less than a month. Everyone kept taking a few bars here and there thinking I wouldn't notice, since there was so much. By the time I actually went to get some for myself, there were 2 bars and a pack of hot chocolate mix left. I didn't win anything, but I am now getting my pension. That, with my savings, gives me a budget of just over $100,000 per year. Just under $2,000 per week. So far, it's great. No more commute and no more bullcrap meetings. I can sleep in as long as I want, get on Reddit as much as I want, and pretty much do whatever I want within reason. Basically, it tastes like freedom. I never thought I'd get to tell the internet this story. I won a lifetime supply of butt lubricant from a local adult shop near my hometown. My girlfriend and I were visiting from our home on the coast of the state in which I live. We drove past the shop and I remarked that I remembered when it was a tiny store only about 800 square feet in size. It's huge now, easily more than 6,000 square feet. She remarked that she'd never been inside and was genuinely curious. We went in and looked around for a while and a cute girl behind the counter asked if we had entered their yearly prize drawing. Nope, we entered our information. A few months go by and I'd long since forgotten about it. I got an email and a voicemail message one day telling me I won a lifetime supply of CleanStream water-based lubricant. It turns out you get 1 8-ounce tube each month. You must pick it up in the store, but if you can't make it to the store that month, you can call or email and request it to be put on hold until you can try to make it by there. Until my girlfriend and I broke up, I was making great use of the stuff since she enjoyed doing the deed that particular way. Now though, we've been broken up about 3 months and I have 7 full bottles of this stuff that need to get used. I'm gonna have to start dating again, I guess. I mean, it's probably gonna be a good line on the first date. So, I won a lifetime supply of this stuff. Not me, but during the time of the Vietnam War, my grandfather was convinced by some shady dude to buy a stake in an apartment building. Fast forward to today, and he gets $350,000 in the mail per year from the building, which is apparently doing very well. My grandfather has to do absolutely nothing in return. Pretty sweet deal. I get free burritos for a year from Moe's and it's still going strong. I know I didn't win it per se, but the way I got it was by waiting in line for 3.5 hours to be one of the first 50 customers. I had to go away to school, so I haven't really been able to use the pass that much, but when I've been home, I've eaten a lot of burritos. I've won free petrol for life and it's been amazing so far. There was a new McDonald's opening up around campus and they offered free Big Macs for a year to the first 100 people there. 1 free Big Mac per week. A bunch of my friends and I got up at 3 a.m. to go wait in line for our Big Mac vouchers. It's currently week 28 and we all want to die, but we have to use them. We're poor college students, damn it. My dad won a year of free Great Harvest bread, which amounted to 1 loaf of bread per week. It was delicious. Well, I brought a $1 scratch ticket and I keep winning my dollar back. Every time I go to the gas station, I use it to buy another $1 ticket and I keep winning it back. So there's that. When I was working at a pizza place, we had a guest who got free pizza for life. But he didn't win it, he earned it. Our store was robbed and as he was just pulling up to pick up his pizza, he noticed what was going on inside and didn't leave his car. So when the robber drove off, he followed him and got his license plate number and then came back to the store so he could give it to the police. The robber was arrested with all the money and even the checks addressed to our pizza shop still in his car. The guest got free pizza for life. He only came once a month or so, though I don't think there was even a limit on it. Did someone you know go out to buy cigarettes and then abandon their family? My daughter's mother unexpectedly fell pregnant. I hate the unexpectedly fell pregnant bit, but it's less complicated to say it that way. We weren't together long before, 8 months or so. We'd talked a lot about going traveling. She had done a little and wanted to take me to see all those cool places she had been, and we'd both go to see some new cool places together. Becoming a mother pretty much seemed like it was the end of the world for her. I tried to be optimistic, tried making up stories of how we'd be cool parents who traveled the world with our kid, and our kid would grow up with massively broad horizons. I don't know if she ever believed that could be a possibility, but eventually our daughter was born. Even now I don't know how to portray my daughter's mother as someone who just abandoned their child, but I'll cut it down a bit. There was no motherly instinct in her. Whether it wasn't there or she just didn't want to be a mother, I don't know. She had her life planned out and a baby messed it all up. After about 4 or 5 months of heartbreakingly never seeing any love for our daughter, I gave her the out she wanted. I said, "If you can't or won't be a mother, you know where the fricking door is." Within an hour, she had packed, called her sister to pick her up, and she left. At first, it was tough to find a rhythm to our lives, but I have some good family who helped me a lot. I grew up the youngest of 4 boys, and I know nothing at all about little girls. At the beginning, every couple of months or so, I sent messages, emails, or Facebook messages. In 3 years, I never received a reply, not a word from her since the week she left. Eventually, I deleted her from my Facebook. After weeks of hurting and hoping she'd reply, her sister showed me a message telling her she wished I'd stop sending the messages. She said she just wants to forget it. It being her daughter. She often referred to her as it when she was pregnant since we avoided knowing the gender and even a few times when she was born until I flipped my crap about it. My daughter is 7 now and is happy and loved. I've kind of always skirted around the subject of mum with her. I went with the story that mummy lives far, far, far away and she wanted you to live here with me where you'd be loved and safe, which appeases her, among a few other fairy tale stories I told her like Mummy is a Fairy. She's pretty happy-go-lucky, which I hope she never grows out of, but there's going to come a time when she's going to want to know more. Incredibly tempting to go down the road of your mum's a selfish C-word, but that won't happen. About a year ago, I came to find out she has a little brother in either America or Canada now with a guy she met in New Zealand. I don't know what to think about that. I don't know whether it's karma or irony. Before I met her mum, I was a bit of a jerk, irresponsible, quick to run if the going got tough. In some respects, I can understand why she left and why others leave their kids. I was there, willing to change my plans for a child that she didn't want in that life. I gave her the option. I don't resent her taking it, but I'll always resent wanting to forget, though. My daughter's mother wanted to spend her life traveling rather than being a mother. Not mad at her, I'm doing as well as I can. Way to step up, my man. It's amazing the ways different parents can respond to the responsibility of parenthood. I've heard that some parents who initially feel nothing eventually grow into it, so maybe the mother should have stuck around, but at least this girl has one loving parent. My grandfather, who I've never met, walked out on my dad. I never really knew anything about him other than that he lived in Florida and chose favorites to the extreme. My dad has 9 brothers and sisters he left behind with my amazing grandmother, Rose. Who I call my grandfather is another amazing person named Jim. Jim worked at a casket company and listened to my grandmother's story one day at the bake shop, I think. After hearing it, he would send check after check to my grandmother offering to help, which my grandmother would never cash and just let build up. When he realized he wasn't losing any money from his bank account, he showed up at my grandmother's doorstep with another check and talked to her. He lived with her after that day until the day she sadly died. Jim is 90 years old and still kicking it. I love that man more than I can express in words. He took in 10 kids? My God, that man is a freaking saint. On my 6th birthday party, my birth mother packed up at the house and took me, my brother, and sister a few states away to stay with her brother. When we finally came back, we were living with her family and got to visit my dad in our old house. Seeing the small table and the thrown-in furniture used to resemble a memory of a house is still burned into my soul, especially the image of my heartbroken dad sitting alone at the table when we left. The more I learn and look back at how my dad handled my birth mother being the worst of people, the more I love and appreciate him. Sucks that I spent so much time fighting with him growing up. I'm just looking around this group of stories to see if my dad's here, because I'd really like to hear his explanation. My real grandfather was a piece of work. I wouldn't say that he was a terrible person, but he was rough. He left my grandmother in the 50s with 5 kids and nothing. I know there are stories about him messing around during World War II with every woman he could find, and that there are probably a lot of half-siblings out there that nobody knows about. Well, I know my mum said they were all so poor growing up because the only income they had was their mum, my grandmother, doing things like secretarial work. The man I call Grandpa found her, loved her, and married her, and ended up with 5 kids because of it. And as a kid, I never even knew until I was older that he wasn't my real grandpa. He was the one who read stories with me. He actually read Harry Potter as an old man because he knew I'd read it and wanted to be able to talk to me about it. And he's the one who always had the Werther's candy for me. I loved that man. I miss him a lot now that he's gone. He's my reminder that anything can make a family as long as everyone cares about each other. No blood relations need be involved. Meanwhile, the only thing my real grandfather ever gave me was a washer and a dryer that are from the 90s that I brought after he died from his tiny little dirty trailer. I needed a washer and dryer, and my mum desperately needed to sell the stuff to have money to pay for his funeral. There's a lesson in this somewhere for people. My real grandpa married and divorced and remarried again and again. In the end, he died sad and lonely and angry with the world all by himself in a dirty little trailer. The man we call my grandpa died surrounded by his adopted family and his wife and even grandkids, who all loved him and mourned his loss something fierce. Whilst my parents divorced when I was 4, and possibly one of my earliest memories was my dad and his guitar case walking out of the first home I knew, this story is someone else's. I did a 6-month stint as a credit and debit card call center goon leading up to the end of last year. I enjoyed it, and as much of a cynical jerk as I may be, I love helping people. This particular one will stay with me forever. A woman called up asking me to update her title. It was listed as Mrs., and she informed me that she had been divorced some time ago. I offered my condolences and she stuttered somewhat, but thanked me, saying it was for the best. After a little bit of conversing, she ended up spilling her guts to me and explained that her husband had just up and ditched her and their son on fricking Christmas Eve. Just up and left without a word after 20-ish years of marriage. She had done some digging and he was in Southeast Asia doing a bunch of working girls and a whole load of substances at the same time. After revealing this to her son, the son started acting out, and I related to this. It kind of hit home, and I said that from my experience, he was 20 and I was the result of my dad walking, that the rebellion is anger and to not hate him for it. Just support and love him and give him the option of contact with his father. And so on and so forth. She was in tears by the end, apologizing profusely for going on a tangent and that it probably wasn't my job to deal with her crap. To which I replied, "You're a person before you're a customer, and sometimes we all just need someone to listen." She felt a lot better and went on her way, but ended the conversation saying she wished she had never searched for her ex, as the truth hurt more than not knowing. People leave because of many reasons. Let them, lest you end up hurting yourself more. My mother went on a trip when I was 7. I remember asking my dad when she was coming back. She got in touch a few years after that, but it still hurt having to learn that she lied to me. I still don't have many good feelings about her. It's probably because I never really knew how to trust her after that. She still believes that she can have a big say in my life even after she left, even though she never helps my father with any bills. She acts like nothing ever happened, like she didn't betray my father and abandon me, and my brother, who was 4 at the time. She still tries to act like the doting mother by promising to help my father, but conveniently forgets to send money. And when she does send some cash, she never lets us forget it. I didn't just take off and leave. We both knew I was heading to another state to live for the remainder of our son's life. I set up child support before I left and have had my son every summer since I left. I decided to leave because I was too immature to raise him to be a functioning member of society. I messed up my life before he was even born and I didn't want him to follow me down that path. 16 years later, he now has a stable life with a brother and sister that he cares about. I'm very proud of everything they've accomplished. I took the easy way out and just ran away. Someday I'll sit him down and explain everything, but it might be too late. Admitting that you were in the wrong doesn't make this okay, but at least you owned it. It doesn't look like you had another family afterwards, so maybe you learned from your mistakes. I was the one who left. My mother wasn't the world's worst, but the substances were starting to become a major issue. My father had already left, and we saw him about once every couple of months. My mum always had a new boyfriend, and it was never a good one. I was growing very sick of the situation, and I knew that I had to get out of it. The only problem was that my little sister was stuck in the same boat. I was 11, and she was 3. In the middle of the night, I grabbed my little sister, a backpack of clothes for both of us, and my bicycle. I rode until I reached my grandma's house. It wasn't too far, about 25 miles. It felt like it took forever. My grandma took us in, and that's where we stayed. It's not that we didn't have a grandma before, but my mum had always refused to get treatment and accept help. My grandma would offer, my mum would get angry, and we'd be back out the door. This time was different. My grandma changed the locks in the morning. Mum was too hopped up on the substances and didn't wake up until around noon. Plenty of time to get things done. My grandma set up a bedroom for both of us, and when my mum finally woke that morning, she broke down. It was like she finally realized that something had to change. She finally entered treatment. Fast forward 18 years, my wonderful grandparents have passed away, but I have a respectable relationship with my mum. She's clean and runs her own cleaning business that makes ends meet. She just received her GED. My little sister is a semester away from graduating college, and she was the second person in my family to ever graduate high school. I was the first. I got an athletic scholarship and went to college. 2 master's degrees and a job, brand new house, and 2 awesome dogs later, and I'm the happiest guy in the world. I'm a teacher, and my experience has been what led to my success. I share pieces of it with my students, behavioral disorders, to let them know that everyone has a chance. Sometimes you just have to take it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad walked out on my family when I was about 4 years old. He left us for a woman who he'd been sleeping with to get Crystal. I grew up hearing constant fighting in my house, but I remember that day. My mother sounded more terrified and desperate than I'd ever heard her before. I was sitting behind a chair in the living room, and I remember not liking how cold it was. Slamming doors, screaming. They came out and my dad just said he was leaving. I ran to him because I wanted to go too. He literally shut the door in my face and left. I remember the worst part about it was my mum sitting on the floor, sobbing. I sat on her lap and told her, "It'll be okay, Mummy. I love you." Seriously, I've always wanted to just shut that memory out. Blech. My grandfather left my dad and his family on my dad's first birthday. So now my dad hates his birthday and his family kinda hates him because they feel like it was his fault or something. My dad ended up getting an awesome stepdad and kept some contact with his biological dad. Both of them died within a few months of each other a few years ago. There was no funeral for my biological grandfather. My dad wasn't sad at all. When his stepdad died though, he gave the eulogy and it's the only time I've ever seen my dad cry. My grandfather went out while my grandmother was in labor and he never came back. She sent the cops looking for him and everything, and when they went to her house, he had left a note saying he got his secretary pregnant and he was leaving. He left her with no money, 4 kids, and having never worked in her life. My dad was the one she was giving birth to. He never met his father until he was called to my grandfather's deathbed a few years ago. When my dad walked into that hospital to see him, the witch who he had cheated with stepped in front of my dad before he went into the room, saying, "You aren't getting any money." My dad said, "Shut up. I just want to meet my father." She stepped aside. We walked in, and the old man saw us. His face changed expressions from plain to absolute terror. He began sobbing. Sobbing. How could he know it was his son, you ask? Because they looked like fricking identical twins. He barely sobbed out the words, "You look just like me." He tried to say, "I'm sorry," but my dad interrupted, saying, "I forgive you." This sounds like a scene from a movie, but it is the most precious memory I have of my dad. I've never seen my dad the same way again. He's my personal hero. How could he just forgive him? My dad never had a Christmas because of how poor they were. He did Boy Scouts alone. I just don't know how he forgave him. I don't get it. I can tell you how, because it's something I figured out maybe 5 years ago after dealing with an unresolved anger over my wife leaving me for one of my supposed best friends. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the person you're forgiving. Holding on to all that anger and pain just eats you up and rips your soul apart. Once you forgive the person, you start to heal the damage. Until then, it's just a scab over a festering wound. My father moved out when I was 7. He was going to visit his sick father, which might have been partially true as my grandfather on his side was sick and ended up passing away around that time. I was just really confused why my mother was crying when he said he was going to visit my grandpa. I found out why when he didn't come back. Last time I heard from him, he called me on my 9th birthday to tell me he wasn't going to pick me up that Friday for the weekends at his place that we usually have, because he was going to find a new house to live in and didn't want to bore me with paperwork. Anyway, I've never heard from him again. I wanted to comment because something actually happened regarding my father around 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, a co-worker at my restaurant pulled me aside and told me she saw a guy with my last name who looked like me. My co-worker said he had asked the guy if he had a son named my name, and the man said he did, but he hadn't seen him in a long time. I kinda blew it off as a coincidence, but 2 weeks ago, the co-worker pulled me aside again and said the guy came back with a business card, asking to give the card to me, since he knew my co-worker worked with me. It was him. So now I have my father's cell number, work address, work numbers, and email. I'm not really sure if I'm going to call or email or not. He has the same handwriting as me. My mother was a working girl, alcoholic, and addicted to substances. She left when I was 3 and never came back. My father would tell me that she loved me very much but just wasn't ready or mature enough to have a child. He passed away when I was 16. When that happened, I was able to get in contact with my mother's sister, an aunt to me. She would hang out with me, but when I asked around my mother, she would beat around the bush and say that my mum didn't want me to see her the way she was. I hoped to graduate college and then see my mother to show her that I did good and be able to talk to her as an adult, but she died right before I turned 22. So I never got to ask her why, but it's easy enough to assume that when the party lifestyle has its hooks in you, those hooks are deep indeed and never really let go. This is a really sad story. I guess the best thing a person can do in this kind of situation is live long, live well, and use their experiences to make sure that their future loved ones never have any of the same questions growing up. My mum didn't really follow the gonna get cigs, be right back route. It was made very clear she was leaving because she was a mum and felt like my siblings and I robbed her of her youth. With that being said, I was 8 years old when it happened. There were warning signs that she was going down that path. She stopped taking care of her kids. We stopped going to school. For me, I was being bullied and it was better to not go than to go and be made a laughingstock. She stopped making food. She'd give us money to go to the convenience store or pork out on Twinkies or something junk food related. My dad was never home because he was working at a prison and often would pull long shifts, which actually gave my mum time to plan her escape. The internet was starting to become a big thing, so my mum was using it as a tool to find single, younger men and to get them to bring her youth back. She was in her early 30s. Anyway, eventually my dad got wind of something going on. It was actually the school that made him realize something was amiss. My mum didn't care about us not going to school, but made clear that should we leave and wander the neighborhood, we should run from people who would recognize us. Well, the principal went to see why we weren't in school. My mum apparently said we were at the park, and the principal, a really sweet lady, went looking. Sure enough, we were playing on the jungle gym, and my dad was called. Once that happened, the next thing I know, my mum was leaving. I remember I was in tears, and I just knew that I wasn't going to see her again. And I was right. 12 years went by. I went from depressed to resentful to accepting what had happened. I talked to her on Skype once, but that was really it. My grandmother had raised me, and when I turned 14, I immigrated to Canada, where I now reside. November of the 12th year she abandoned me, I found out she was dying of cancer, and it was only a matter of weeks before she would die. I hopped on a plane with my ex's mum and I saw her. She was 42 when I saw her, and she looked like she was 70. Anyway, I spent a good 5 days with her. We didn't talk much. I was comforted by her presence and she was comforted by mine. It broke my heart to leave her, but I had to go back to work. I'll never forget 3 things though. 1, she said I love you for the very first time. 2, she endured great physical pain to get downstairs to say goodbye to me. And finally, how she begged me not to leave her. She died not even a week after I got back. I'll always remember the time I spent with her as an adult and cherish that. I didn't go to see her to make things right or whatever. I'd learned by that point she had made mistakes, and dwelling on the why of it all was getting me nowhere. She left me as a sickly, soft-spoken, crying little girl and saw me for the first time before she died as a healthy, strong-willed adult. I got a package from my stepdad about a month later. Inside was a pearl necklace that I wear every day, and a picture of me from when I was 8 years old. With it, there was a small note about how she kept that picture with her all the time and would often wonder about me. My siblings had reached out to her, but I never did. She had recent pictures of them, but just this one tattered old photograph of me. It made me cry. I know that this was a long story, so I'll end it and say that in her case, she may have made some horrific mistakes, but in the end, she would have done anything to change what she did. But I also know that she needed to leave because she was ruining the lives of my siblings and I. I love my mum, and I always will. My cousin from an extended part of my family decided to disappear. At least, that's what my family tells me. In the late 90s and noughties, I spent a lot of time with him and his family in Greenville, South Carolina. They would also come up to North Carolina to visit us. I would like to think I was the closest person to him from the North Carolina side of the family. He's 1 year older than me and should be turning 25 or so soon. All was fine until his mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness. She fought for years and was as hard-nosed a fighter as I've ever seen. During this fight, his dad was diagnosed with lung cancer and died relatively soon afterwards. Eventually, his mother passed away as well, and my cousin was essentially on his own. My side of the family tried to keep in touch, and they thought of all people, I'd be the one he'd reach out to. I haven't heard from him since 2009, when I believe he was selling real estate in South Carolina. I've tried all social media to find him. I'm fairly certain he just wants to disappear. It worries me though, because what if that wasn't the case? I mean, I can definitely see that being his personality, but you never know. I know I've gone on a little rant here, but I knew him and his friends pretty well. I know they're the kind of people who are on Reddit. Surely one of them, and maybe even my cousin, will see this and know with certainty who I'm talking about. Chris, you don't have to get in touch or even have a friend let me know you're alright. I just wanted to let you know I've not forgotten about you and I miss you. Emergency service workers. When have you laughed when you really shouldn't have? I used to work in an adult and pediatric emergency department as a scribe. I followed a doctor, NP, or a PA and wrote their charts. One time a patient came in for downstairs injury to her girl bits. So the PA I was assigned to, who's my father's age, says, that'll be interesting, and we go in. The lady is very friendly, bubbly, overweight, with long, fake nails. He asks her what brings her to the ED, and she says, "Well, you see, I just got my nails done, and I was having fun and really going to town down there, and it felt really good, and I scratched my hoo-ha." She laughed awkwardly, and I couldn't handle myself and had to leave. The PA kept himself together and told the patient I left because my job was over, as I wrote down her complaint. But honestly, I was crying in the hallway with another tech who overheard. The door was shut, but she was loud and proud and the unit was quiet. I scratched my hoo-ha became a response to "What's up?" at my hospital for a bit. During my EMT basic clinical rotations, my buddy Greg and I are working in an emergency room trying to do as many ECGs as possible, so that we could check that off our list of clinical skills that we needed to do. Greg is hooking up an absolutely enormous woman to ECG leads. To accomplish this, he indicates to her that he'll have to move her left melon to gain access to her chest wall. I'm not exaggerating when I say that she weighed 400 pounds. One of her heaping bosoms probably weighed a solid 40 pounds by itself. So Greg, using the back of his forearm, is pushing aside her left chest. Or trying to, and failing. So he's basically rubbing her left chesticle with his forearm, trying to get it out of the way. His face, meanwhile, is about 12 inches from her face. She leans closer to Greg, moans, and says, "Oh, you like that, don't you?" And I have to leave. I admitted a patient to a surgical floor who had a baton stuck up his butt. When getting to the report, I couldn't help but chuckle. It was the first time I'd dealt with someone who had a foreign object where it shouldn't have been. The worst part was when I showed him the intraoperative pictures of them removing it, he asked the surgeon where the glitter went. "Oh, don't worry. He'll keep finding glitter for years. It never goes away." Once again, doing videos on medical cases, the narrator prepares for the deluge of completely innocent men who seem to fall exactly onto cylindrical objects butt first after their pants fell off. The only thing different about this story is the absence of the words, "I tripped and fell." In fact, this gentleman seems to own it. I work as an X-ray tech in a heavily Hispanic area in the US. I don't know a lot of Spanish, but I know just enough to get by. We get this patient in the ER, and there are 3 of us trying to fumble our way through this exam in our broken Spanish. We eventually get through the exam, and we're all kind of congratulating each other on knowing just enough Spanish. Then, out of the middle of nowhere, this guy says, "You know, you guys speak pretty good Spanish." In perfect English. I guess none of us decided to ask if he spoke English. Similar story, I walked in to perform an exam and the patient is just observing me. I said, "Hi sir, I'm blah blah blah, I'm here to do blah blah blah. How's your day going?" No response. "Can you hear me?" Now I'm thinking that he's not a native or a psych patient. Habla inglés? The patient says, "Do I look like a fricking wetback?" I was holding inside my laughter as I said, no? He was a regular, no tattoos Hispanic male with a mustache with a tanned complexion. He looked like Pedro from Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, he did look like an immigrant that crossed a river. Was an EMT. My partner was doing a head-to-toe on a little old lady that fell at a nursing home. She gets to the patient's left hip, squeezes it and says, "Ma'am, do you know how long you've had this growth on your hip?" Little old lady replies in a TV-worthy Boston Brahmin accent, "That's my chest, dear." Gave myself a bloody nose when I tried to hide my laughter by shoving my face into the oxygen bag and smacking it on the tank. Super busy day on the oncology floor, short-staffed, and I had 6 patients and was in charge. Literally running up and down the halls, no lunch. A patient passed away peacefully. I call next of kin to notify. I stay on the phone to offer condolences and they were speechless. The conversation is weird, so I call the next number on the list, and that call was okay. Turns out I dialed the wrong number, but the wrong number also had a family member in the same hospital. 30 minutes later, the wrong number lady rushes into the unit and asks about the death in room 417. Wasn't a dead patient, by the way. I immediately get drenched in sweat and tell her my error, I got woozy and dizzy. She props me up and started making jokes. We ended up hugging and laughing. She brought me lunch and a card the next week, and I smile every time I think of her. She made my screw-up livable. I had a patient who was high on some intense cocktail of substances. We found him jumping from couch to couch in a lobby covered in freshly cut hair that wasn't his. We finally get him to the ambulance, but he proceeded to scream at my partner, "You have beautiful eyes. I'm gonna F you in the butt." And then he begins to cry for his mother. We make it to the hospital and the patient's vocabulary decreases to only meatballs. Every question the nurse asks, that was his response. We try to remain professional as possible, but sometimes you can't help but laugh. Damn it, he stole my pickup line. Responded to a fatal fire. When I arrived on scene and went to where the body was located, the trooper introduced me to the deceased. The trooper said, where are my manners? Meet Frank, deceased. Say hello, Frank. As you can see, he had a late night of drinking and a bad case of setting himself on fire. Laughing in front of a dead guy who set himself on fire is not one of my strong moments. Ex-firefighter here responded to a rollover with persons trapped inside. It turned out to be a car versus train. Got the front wheels stuck on the tracks. I have no clue how. It was a regular road crossing, so the train is barreling down, blaring horn clips, and flips the car into the ditch. The driver was trapped. My partner, instead of the usual, "Hi ma'am, where are you hurt?" etc., said to the driver, "Did you crap your pants?" One of my friends was an EMT, and he responded to a call from a guy who got attacked by his cat. Turns out the guy tried to do the deed with his cat, and the cat wasn't having any of it. My friend said that was the only time he and his partner laughed in a client's face. So I was riding along with my dad, who was a firefighter and paramedic, and we went to the house for a mentally handicapped female who had fallen and couldn't get up. I should mention that this female lives with her husband, who is also mentally handicapped, and they have a caretaker who checks in on them daily but doesn't hang around 24/7. Anyway, so we sat her up and my dad asks his other medic to run out to the ambulance to grab an extra cold compress to put on her head, where she fell. But she says there's an ice pack in her freezer that will work just fine in the next room. Well, the other medic goes into the other room and looks for about 2 minutes before coming back with a bag of frozen vegetables that would work as well. The mentally handicapped lady looks him straight in the face and says, "That's not a cold pack, those are vegetables. Are you retarded?" In short, paramedic got called retarded by a mentally handicapped woman. I feel like that's one of the few people who could get away with using that insult. Also, how do you respond when she calls you that? Pretty damn funny. This happened to me once, at a grocery store when the new tap-to-pay cards came out. I'd never used it, so I quickly tapped it, and it didn't register as you had to hold it there for a few seconds. The mentally challenged bag boy said, "Is this guy retarded?" to the cashier. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry. I was administering IV push meds to a patient. Their guest was German and asks me with a giant smile, "Are those the Woodstock substances that make him super happy hippo, yeah?" I fricking lost it. Patient who was in police custody and out of his mind on some substance or other. A nurse entered to use a catheter to get a urine sample for the analysis, and in the process of doing that, the patient screams, "It feels like a fly is doing the deed with my wang." Also, an older guy who may or may not have been there mentally gave me a lecture on how he knew I was a liar because my lips were moving. I had to step out of the room to laugh. Sort of reverse here. During my rotations at a university medical center, I was shadowing an RN when we went to help a patient who was paralyzed from the waist down from a motorcycle accident. Keep in mind, this patient was big, probably 300 pounds, and he couldn't go number 2 by himself anymore. Therefore, the RN put on rock music, snapped on some gloves, and proceeded to joke with the patient. We had to push down on his stomach while digitally activating his butt to make the brown stuff come out. I swear about a gallon of it burst forth, and the nurse told me it was the biggest code brown he had ever seen. Making jokes and laughing with the patient made it extremely comfortable and a fun experience. 10 out of 10 would stick my finger up a butt again. I had a 95-year-old nurse crap on my hand once. We both laughed. I answered a fire alarm at a hotel room once. I knocked on the door and a rail-thin, 90-poundish woman answered the door in nothing but a t-shirt. I told her that we need to have access to the hotel room just to verify that there wasn't an issue. I walk in and immediately see a 300-pound, mid-50s guy, the woman was in her 30s, totally undressed and handcuffed to the bed. Alright, whatever. Standard question, do you know how the alarm was set off? Oh yeah, I accidentally hit it when I threw his boxer shorts. Alright ma'am, have a nice night. Cue hilarious laughter from the stairwell back to the firehouse. How do boxers set off a fire alarm? If you throw something at an electric firearm, like a smokehead or something, it can set it off. Same thing happens with CO alarms. If you dropped it or knocked into it, or apparently throw boxes at it, it can set it off. This wasn't a sprinkler head, or I'd have felt far worse for the guy handcuffed to the bed because he would have taken it all. I was an intern firefighter back when I was in college, and we received this distress call from a senior home one day. Apparently there was an old lady about 70 to 75 years old who was really drunk and she broke her hip walking through the hallway. When we got there, she was on the ground covered in her own number 2. The thing I laughed at was what she was saying while she was on the ground. The old lady said, "Get the frick off me!" The captain said, "Ma'am, you need to hold still while the ambulance comes." Hey, Oscar," referring to her housekeeper, "is that you?" Yes, ma'am, Oscar is right here.
Well, F you, Oscar.
Advanced emergency medical technician working a standby at one of our many nightclubs a couple of summers ago. I came back from handing over a transport to find a man with a hole in the front of his jeans all covered in blood. He was sitting calmly next to his friend, joking and having a good time. I ask him what's going on and he admits to drinking and taking quite a bit of white snow. He states that he's not in any pain but worried about all the blood. We expose his nether regions to find out that he had apparently impaled his ball bag on the cleat of a pool umbrella and now had one of his family jewels protruding from said hole. His very British friend saw what happened and yelled, "Bollocks, me mate, your bean is out the bag." I had to excuse myself for a minute.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I had a gentleman unalive himself by placing a clear plastic bag over his head and running a line from a helium tank. Apparently, it's one of the least painful ways to go. You just get sleepy and pass out. No oxygen starvation. Anyways, me and my partner are waiting for the deputy since it's clear he's been dead a while. We start talking in the bathroom with the body. So, what do you think his last words were?
Ahoy! Goodbye, world!
Said in a Mickey Mouse voice, of course. I'll never forget that I had hiccups for 2 hours after we got done laughing our butts off. The report and dealing with the family was super awkward. Had a pregnant lady about to pop and brought her upstairs. The L&D nurses at this facility were pretty snobby and always seemed to have an attitude problem. I gave them my report and told them that according to my assessment, they needed to prep for delivery ASAP. The charge nurse rolled her eyes at me and began condescendingly interviewing the patient, telling her she's sure that the patient will be able to go home tonight. About 5 minutes go by and they finally get her over to the bed from my stretcher. I get my paperwork signed. The nurse goes to check for dilation and lifts up the sheet only to find that the patient is crowning. She immediately starts yelling for help and gives me a dirty look. I whispered, "Told you so," winked and walked out as the rest of the nurses walked in to help. Not my most professional moment, but I had a good chuckle.
She gave you a dirty look for doing your job properly? Jeez.
Some people would rather be right than do the right thing, and this lady clearly took someone else's correct opinion personally. Very satisfying to be in the position of the correct individual. My dad's a police officer and has always been known for his dark dad humor. One unfortunate day, a motorcyclist ran a red light at an intersection just before a truck stop and was run over. The rider's head and helmet were caught under the wheels of the truck and popped. As he tells the story, a lieutenant shows up and asks, "What happened here, and what are we stepping in that's so sticky?" My dad said, "Well, the rider lost his mind." I thought it was funny, as did my dad. Apparently, the lieutenant did not. When I was an EMT and I had a psych patient that had been picked up at the airport by the cops after he was found wandering around barefoot, my report from them was quite vague, so I didn't really know what to expect when I was asking him questions. He didn't seem very oriented and kept drifting off to sleep. I asked him if he knew what year it was, and he said 1985, and he suddenly yelled, 1.21 gigawatts! I was so startled I couldn't help but laugh. I still don't know whether he was messing with me or not, but either way, he must really like Back to the Future. I was an EMT. We responded to a call at a nursing home for a psychological. Got the info from the nurse that the dear little old lady is apparently hallucinating cats. I walked into the patient's room and asked, "Meow, what seems to be the problem here?" My partner and the nurse ran from the room. I found them literally on the floor laughing in the hallway. So I don't know if I fit the category, but this story made me lose all professionalism in a heartbeat. I'm a social worker, so I interview a lot of children. One of the standard questions is asking if children know where their private parts are and asking if anyone has ever touched them there. So I ask this 11-year-old if anyone has tried to touch her, and she says no. I ask if she knows what to do if someone tries to do that. She tells me that whenever she goes to a friend's house, she has a pair of scissors under her pillow for protection. I chuckled a bit, but maintained my composure. I asked the girl if she would tell anyone. She says she'd tell her mum and tell that she didn't kill them on purpose. I lost it. I couldn't continue the interview after that. I told my supervisor about it and she just laughed. A young lady admitted into the ER, embarrassed to death with a small piece of plastic from a toy stuck in her lady parts. While getting an IV from the nurse, she complained about getting jabbed with a metal needle. The nurse started to explain how the IV catheter is actually plastic, to which she responded, "I've got enough plastic stuck in me right now, thank you very much." Back in my army days, we were in the process of doing an 18-mile ruck march. It's pretty hot out. All of a sudden, one of my squad members collapses to the ground. The medics rush to him and start sticking an IV in his arm while asking him questions. Do you know where you are? Do you know what month it is? Do you know what day of the week it is? He looks up, confused. Waffles. No, you fricking moron. Let's get him out of here. It's been brought to my attention that something similar has happened in a documentary where the guy mentioned hash browns. Heat exhaustion is some pretty crazy stuff. It happened to me once. I was very confused and all I could think about were mashed potatoes. I followed everyone, not quite knowing what was going on, and ended up in the chow hall. Standing in the line, someone must have noticed something was wrong. He asked if I was okay, and I responded, I don't know, I just need mashed potatoes. They were talking to me some more. I don't know what they were asking, and all I could do was answer, yes. They led me to the front of the line. Turns out they were serving mashed potatoes. Best damn potatoes I've ever had. After resting, eating, and drinking, I was fine though. I was a newish certified nursing assistant, and a patient caught the bus, self-deleted, during my shift. The aide who had the woman on her assignment grabbed me and another newbie to show us how to do post-mortem care. We undress the body and begin to wash it. I'm standing on one side, other newbie on the other, experienced aide at the foot of the bed. We roll the body onto its side towards me and it moans. The newbie got bug-eyed and started to freak out. The experienced aide explains that it's just air leaving the lungs and passing through the vocal cords. The newbie accepts this but is clearly freaked out. It's her first dead person. We roll the body the other way and it moans again. Newbie begins to freak out again. By now I'm no longer on task and just amused as heck by the newbie. Then the newbie glances at our deceased friend's face. In the course of rolling the body back and forth, her eyelids had been pushed open. Newbie starts to panic. She's looking at me. Oh God, she's looking at me. Why is she looking at me? Newbie then runs out of the room and I just lose it. Can't hold it together anymore and I start to laugh. After the moment passed, I felt a little bad laughing while preparing a body for the funeral home, but I know that our patient would have found the situation hysterical too. Ex-corrections officer. I was caught on camera laughing wildly while having to subdue an undressed man covered in number 2 wielding a butt shank. He'd used the brown stuff to paint on Peter Criss makeup. That stuff cracked me up. Well, I'm guessing that particular Kiss tribute band didn't take off then. Sad. I feel it would have been novel, if not good. Firefighter here. I was doing a primary search on the first floor when my captain and I crawled straight into a special dungeon. The call started out pretty normal as far as emergency dispatches are concerned. A neighbor sees smoke coming out from a house nearby, the proper address is given, and we roll out. On scene now, and the neighbors have gathered and informed us that the homeowner is usually gone this time of day. But usually doesn't cut it in the fire service, so we're going in. So my captain and I grab a handline and went to complete a primary search of the first floor as the rest of the arriving responders set up a second floor egress route and pull more handlines. So as soon as we get in the front door, amen Halligan, we stick along the right side wall and move further into the house. Thermal imaging shows no heat, but there was a ton of smoke coming from the door that leads to the basement. We head down the stairs after a careful sounding, and this is when stuff got weird. Imagine a room full of hot smoke. That smoke will rise, and since this smoke was coming from the basement, the lower we got into the basement, the more smoke cleared. Walls, ceiling, floor all lined with rubber, and a close rack full of rubber suits. A table with straps, all also covered in rubber. Whips, cuffs, some special toys, and things that shouldn't belong in any chamber related to doing the deed. And the most effed up part we found down there was the homeowner, in a full dungeon uniform, trying to put out a fire that was running from the top of the light stand he had set up to the ceiling. It wasn't too big to be honest, but way too big to be fanning with a folded rubber suit while wearing another rubber suit in a room covered in rubber. This guy must not have realized all the gross, toxic, thick smoke heading up the stairs and out of the house. Honestly, I don't know how long he was down there, but without my SCBA on, it felt like I was snorting Rubbermaid. We grabbed the homeowner, who was now suffering from severe overheating and exhaustion because he was in a full-body rubber suit panicking, and then we got the fire out. So when did I laugh when I shouldn't have? Well, right as we came into full view of this chamber, I looked back at my God-loving Christian captain who was just in shock as his worldview was altered. So I started cracking up there, and once you start laughing when you're not supposed to, it's impossible to stop. So I'm losing it as well as my oxygen supply. I've seriously never gone through a tank that quick in my career. So the fire was out and people were gathered, as at any fire, barn or house, and were watching two firefighters, one of whom was laughing his butt off, carry this black, steamy, rubber-covered creature out of his house. Then we have to start getting this guy's outfit off because he's showing signs of extreme exhaustion. I calmed down enough to cut this guy out of his suit in front of all his neighbors, who are now realizing this steamy black creature is their neighbor. That's when we figured we should disperse everyone to give the guy a little privacy. We even pulled the trucks up to block most of the scene. All in all, the guy thanked us but said he was quite embarrassed about the whole thing, which was quite obvious. He was a pretty normal guy as far as I'm concerned. He explained a little about how he likes the feeling of rubber, completely airtight around his skin, which was unneeded information, but I'm not the one to tell anyone how to live their life. You do you, rubber suit man. We had an OD we responded to that turned into a running joke at the station. Some girl tried to self-delete and took like 2 milligrams of fentanyl. Normal doses are in micrograms, not milligrams. Anyway, got her close enough to the ER and pumped her full of Narcan and she woke up. Partner opened the back doors and said, "All better, huh?" And she was angry about it and whined about how we didn't know what we were doing. I was being a bit of a jerk and said, "Well, the Narcan was a great guess then." To which she screamed, "Narcan don't do crap." And now whenever we use Narcan, it's good form to shout, "Narcan don't do crap," while pushing it. Little old racist white ladies are always good for a giggle as well. When did sheer luck save you from catastrophe? So I would say I was around 10 years old and my family decides to take the dog for a walk. I decide I want to rollerblade and make big circles around my family as they walk. At one point, I end up a block ahead of my family and a rusty, beat-up truck pulls up and stops, and a guy jumps out. I remember him having a super short beard. He says, "Hey kid, check this out." And he pulls out a skateboard and rides it on the street and says, "Pretty cool skateboard, huh kid? You want it?" I, being completely happy with my rollerblades, say, "No thank you." He says, "Come on, it's free, just come over here and take it." I said, "No, I like my rollerblades." At this point, he looks down the street and sees my family walking up it. Without saying anything to me, he throws his skateboard in the back, jumps in his truck and drives away. I never thought it was weird, didn't tell my parents, and in my head it was like, some dude just tried to give me a skateboard I didn't want. 10 years later, I'm like, holy frick, thank God I didn't fricking like skateboards. In short, didn't get kidnapped because I thought skateboards suck. Finding out from an auntie from my dad's side that my parents were going to let my mum's sister and husband adopt me as a baby because they were childless for a long time. If the transaction happened, it would have been kept a secret. Thank goodness it never happened. The woman is a nutcase and the husband ended up divorcing her after they had a son. Their kid grew up whacked and feral and my parents became his guardian. The poor kid didn't even know how to wipe his butt and had to be spoon-fed at age 10. This one happened to someone else, but it's still interesting. I'm 16 years old and last year when I was walking home from school, I saw two little kids that couldn't be older than 9 who were walking home a little bit in front of me. I assumed they were brother and sister. Anyway, me being so much bigger with longer legs, I eventually started to catch up to them. And right when I was about to turn off into my street, I noticed a car pull up next to them and asked them to get in. My heart stopped when I heard the older one say, "But mister, we don't know you." After that, I kept walking towards them and screamed out, "Lucy, Mark," because I didn't know their actual names. And they both looked at me. I ran up and said, "Guys, don't run off on me like that. Stay close." I pretended like I didn't see the car pulled up next to them and walked with them until the car drove off. They asked me who I was, but I just kept telling them to be quiet until the man goes away. When the guy left, I told them not to talk to strangers and walked them home. I explained to their parents what happened, and I don't think I've ever seen more grateful parents. Don't talk to strangers, kids. So wait, who are you now? Shut up and do what I tell you to do. Which stranger to trust, the calm ones who park next to you in their car, or the one who runs up screaming and pretending to be your sibling? I'm going to say that the assertiveness of this author probably saved those kids. First, let it be known that I have a gift/curse where people feel like they can tell me their life story. Strangers especially. I rode the city bus from a ghetto part of town to Homelessville, where I had to transfer to home. There were a few regulars, but every now and again there'd be someone new and inevitably they'd sit next to me. I was at the transfer bus stop with 3 other people. An old man who spoke no English, so I'd never spoken to. This twitchy gang dude had gotten on the first bus a few stops after I did. Then there was a man in a suit. He looked like the love child of a successful black guy and The Rock. He sat next to me and started a conversation. I don't remember exactly what it was, but something about his line of questioning creeped me out. On the surface, it wasn't anything like, "What undies are you wearing, little girl?" And aside from sitting way too close, he didn't try to touch me. Maybe I was just too wary of strangers, but I just didn't want to talk to him, and I hoped he got onto another bus. However, I was raised to be polite and couldn't think of a way to tell this guy to please stop talking to me. Then twitchy gangbanger plops down next to me on my other side, also too close. Now I'm sandwiched between two guys, and Twitch was almost leaning over me. He starts talking loud and fast, rambling and mumbling to where I can't understand a word. Creepy guy eventually gets up to go stand next to no English, but I still have Mr. Twitchy. Twitchy then proceeds to tell me his life story. He claimed to be in a well-known gang, and I thought he was saying this to appear tough, though he was flying the right colors. He then talked about his role in the gang and how his dealer ripped him off earlier that day. He was pointing to scars on his arms and face and explaining to me how he got them. My bus came and we all climbed into it. Creeper had basically given up talking to me and sat somewhere near the front of the bus, while Twitch followed me to the back. He wasn't as close as he'd been before, so I calmed down ever so slightly. It also helped that I was sitting next to a regular who was blind, so if push came to shove, I could whip Twitch with the cane. He kept up with the constant monologue and didn't stop until Creeper got off the bus. Twitch then says, "Oh, I thought that weirdo was never gonna leave," and runs off. Before he does, I hear him asking the driver the quickest route to get back to where we'd been picked up. I went home and using the location and many hours, I found out that Creeper was a convicted, unspeakable act offender. A month later, I also saw a very familiar mugshot in the paper. Twitch was arrested for murder. In short, had a nice talk with a gang member who, it turned out, killed a lot of people. Also, he got on the wrong bus to protect a 16-year-old girl from an unspeakable act offender. Mine was a few months after I'd turned 21. I'm from India and frequently make trips from my house to Bombay, to one in another state around 1,000 kilometers away. It's a 20-hour journey because I prefer buses over trains. I've been doing it for over 15 years and always booked the exact same seat, 4 seats down from the driver on his side. This particular time, though, I booked my ticket late and instead got a seat on the opposite side of the bus. We'd just stopped for dinner, and once done, I got back to my seat and settled down with a book. As soon as we turned back into the highway, there was a thud and a lot of dust and glass flying around. Turns out a truck rammed into the side of the bus. No one was hurt more than a few scratches. However, in my usual seat, there was a lady about 5 feet tall, and there was a huge block of wood that was stuck over her head. If I'd gotten in that seat, I'd have been decapitated. Was quite a what the frick moment and gave me some perspective on life. In short, didn't get my usual seat on the bus, was spared a decapitation. When I was about 7 years old, my twin, an older brother, and I had gone with a family friend to go to his mother's house. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as we'd gone with this man on several such occasions prior. We were living somewhere in Nevada at the time, nearish the California border. He'd asked my parents if it was okay for him to take the 3 of us for a visit, and my parents said yes. I'm not really sure at what time we left, but we never made it to his mother's house. I was looking forward to seeing her cat again. We drove for hours, my brother, sister, and I in the back seat. This man didn't stop to let us out for a bathroom break, and he didn't have anything other than beer for us to drink, and he was drinking as well. After another hour or so of driving, he got pulled over. He told us not to say anything to the officers. They approached his vehicle and could smell the beer coming off him in waves. They noticed us in the back seat and asked if we were his. He, of course, said yes. The officers didn't believe him. Thank God. They asked him to step out of the car and placed him under arrest. He fought them the entire time until they clubbed him into submission just to get him in the back of the cruiser. Another CHP showed up and took us with him to a foster home where we stayed until our parents could come to pick us up. It wasn't until 15 years later that I'd learned that the man had pretty awful intentions with the 3 of us. I never thought of the fact that he didn't bring any of my brothers with us. When the officer asked him why that was, he simply replied that the other brother would have talked. In short, kidnapped at 7, forced to drink beer when thirsty, and nearly the victim of God knows what by a drunk man before he was arrested. Let this be a lesson to parents listening. It's not just strange men you have to look out for. Even acquaintances like this can have pretty sinister intentions. Scary stuff. I was born in Boynton Beach, Florida, and spent my first few years in a home that skirted some really rough neighborhoods. Though the houses on my street were mostly low-income and minority families who were just trying to raise their kids, occasionally we'd have some break-ins or gang fights overflow into our community. For a span of a few years, we had a smack-addicted homeless man who would hit our neighborhood for easily pawnable goods to support his habit. The cops always knew it was him and would lock him up for a few months, And then, when released, he'd be at it again. I was really young, just under 3 years old, the night he broke into our house for the second time. He woke me up as he was shining a flashlight into my bedroom window, looking for an easy way in. And moi, being the headstrong toddler that I was, got up to investigate the policeman's flashlight, as I later told my mum. Apparently, I must have scared the crap out of him when I sleepily greeted him as he came in through our kitchen window, because he abandoned all intention of robbing our home and instead picked me up to rock and soothe me back to sleep, laid me down on our living room couch, and hightailed it through our rear door. I'd forgotten the whole incident completely by the time my mum retold me the story later in life, and initially was freaked out by my 3-year-old description of the scary man with the long fingernails. However, I look back at it now with a level of humility. It could have been someone else, much meaner and a far more tragic situation. This man, who was bottom of the totem pole by most societal standards, an addict, homeless, and with petty theft on his crime list, was still a human being who chose to be gentle with a child. In some ways, it restored my faith in humanity. I was driving down a country road at night. I saw a deer crossing sign and decided to slow down significantly for the upcoming blind corner. Came around the corner going about 20 km per hour as opposed to the 80 posted limit. In the middle of the fricking road is some moron walking and wheeling his bicycle. I stopped about 3 inches shy of hitting him. If I'd been doing 80, I would have had to dig a grave. I like how you go right past, would have had to call the cops or fill out lots of paperwork, right to dig a grave. And you've got to dig quick too. If you spend too much time on the grave, someone will walk by, start asking questions, and, well, now you've got to dig another one.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
When I was in kindergarten, a man I didn't even recognize came to walk me home. Being as stupid as I was, I grabbed my bags and went with him. I'm not sure how, but he even knew my name, I think. We chatted and he walked me home, and as I walked through the doors, my parents ran to me. Turned out they were looking for me everywhere, thinking I'd been kidnapped. My teacher had told them that I'd left with a man claiming to be a relative. To this day, nobody knows who the man was that walked me home. I was chased by an adult male when I was 7. My mum asked me to deliver some eggs and sugar to a neighbor. Typical upper-class, northeast neighborhood, no crime. After I delivered the goods, I started back home, about a quarter mile. There were no streetlights and it was very dark that night, dark enough that I could barely see anything, when I got to a long bend with bushes on both sides. I just passed a driveway when I heard a loud rustling behind me, so I jumped and looked back at the same time, and I saw a large, dark figure emerge from the bushes towards me. I was a fast kid, fastest in my class, fastest in my soccer club, and all I could think of was how dark it was and how if I tripped on something, I was a goner. I could hear a man's grunt and inhales and exhales close behind me. I couldn't hear his feet though, just his breath, and it sounded like he was no more than 5 feet behind me. I kept thinking all I had to do was get within sight of my front yard with all those lights and he would turn back and quit. But when we got that close and we were running in the light, I could feel him pressing harder, and I felt like he was getting closer. I decided to take a shortcut through a hole in a row of bushes that bordered our land. My siblings and I had used the shortcut pretty much every time we've walked in that direction, so I knew there was a 2-foot drop to the driveway. I ran and ducked through the hole and into my driveway, and I could hear him crash through the bushes. Didn't hear him fall, and he was still after me. When I got to about 20 feet from my front door, I no longer heard him, which was good because I fumbled with the screen door, and in doing so, I got my pinky finger caught and cut off the last knuckle. I opened the heavy front door, jumped inside, slammed it shut and locked, screamed out for my dad, and didn't notice my finger was missing a knuckle until my mum let me go from a long hug. My dad ran out after the guy with a weapon, but he was gone. My dad came back, fished out the end of my finger and put it in a bag of ice to take to the hospital. But they said it was pointless, no pun intended, to try and reattach it. Forget why exactly. The police took my story, looked around, but aside from the bushes being jacked up and some grass pressed down in an obvious pathway across my yard, there was nothing. A few months later in a neighboring town, there was a boy about my age who went missing while walking from a friend's house late at night. Then another a few months after that. I never heard anything about the fate of those kids, and for all I know, it's not at all related to my being chased. But it erased the idea I tried to believe that maybe some guy was just messing around. A scenario that let me forget the fear of going outside at night. The boys' disappearances also made me very appreciative for life. And fast feet. Sorry for the long story, I haven't really thought about it in a very long time, so retelling it has reminded me I need to talk to my 2 kids about being safe around people. And maybe I should have them come with me to run the track for a few laps. Years ago, I was walking on the sidewalk during one of those silent hill days that San Francisco has sometimes, the entire world filled with fog, every sound muffled. Still on the sidewalk, I turned to cross the street and paused for absolutely no reason with my hand up in front of me, and felt something tingle on my fingertips. Something flat and yellow appeared and then disappeared in front of me in a flash, at hip level, without making a sound. It took me about 10 seconds to realize what I'd just seen was a taxicab streaming by at about 50 miles per hour that had been unable to see the road and had driven onto the sidewalk. The tingle I felt in my fingertips was my hand touching the side of the passenger's side window. In short, I'm the luckiest motherfricker on the planet. See, I've never witnessed one of those pea-super fogs that makes it literally impossible to see the road you're driving on from your car, but I feel like this is more of a driver problem than it is a weather problem. When I was around 9, I went roller skating with my older friends, who were around 12 years old. We had just skated out of our neighborhood area when I realized that I forgot something. So I skated home, which was literally 2 minutes away, got whatever, and headed back. I found out that my two friends had crossed the small road while I was gone and had gotten hit by a driver who ran the red light. It was a hit and run. It was especially sad because one was a long-time ballet dancer and she was never able to recover from it. Mum and I were coming home from the mall when I was 10. My mum says that she thinks the car behind us is following us. She makes a series of random turns, and the guy is still behind us. She sees a cop car sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store, so she pulls into the parking lot and drives up to the cop. The man then hightails it around us and out of the parking lot, flipping us off as he passes us by. I'm still curious as to why he was following us. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was watching TV in the basement with my dad while my mum was out with her friends. We heard the door open upstairs and someone walking around. My dad told me to go upstairs and say hi to my mom, and being lazy, I refused. A few hours later, my mom came home and she asked my dad if he'd moved some of the stuff in our house because it was missing. We had been robbed. If I hadn't been so lazy, I would have gone upstairs and that guy might have taken me too. He might have also seen that someone was home and fled, but the other option is really scary to think about. I also avoided a confrontation with robbers. When I was in high school, I took courses at the college 40 minutes away, and the pizza joint where I worked was relatively nearby. Sometimes on days when I had a huge gap between class and work, or no work in the afternoon or evening at all, I would go home and take a nap, pretty much completely undressed. One day I had a long gap, but I decided that I needed to go get some new shoes for work, and so I didn't end up going home that day. I got a call from my mum as I was trying on shoes that someone had broken into the house. If I hadn't decided to buy shoes that day, the 2 to 3 men who broke in would have come across me in the back bedroom, a 17-year-old girl sleeping and undressed. Yikes. In short, brought shoes instead of napping at home and avoided confrontation with robbers in my groggy, undressed state. I was four-wheeling with some friends up in the Rocky Mountains last summer. I'm not from the US and this was my first time, so I was just a passenger. Everything was going normally, at least as normal as I think, yelling yee-haw while listening to the Team America soundtrack, when we took a turn a little too sharp and high-centered on the edge of a cliff. It was like slow motion as we slowly crept towards the edge and I decided to put on my seatbelt. The car got stuck on a mound, but wouldn't move backwards. I think the mound was the only thing that slowed us down enough not to go off the cliff. We were literally an inch away from plummeting to our doom while "America, frick yeah!" was blasting through the speakers. We don't let Corey drive anymore. I hope you see this, Corey. You're an awful driver. I was 19 years old, traveling by car alone through some pretty isolated towns. No cell phone. My trip was about 9 hours, and when you drive for that long, you end up driving with the same traffic for a while. There was a truck that had passed me and then slowed down to the point where it passed over and over. I was a little annoyed, but other than that, I didn't think too much of it. When I pulled over into a small gas station, it pulled over behind me, but didn't drive up to a pump. As I stood there while the gas pump ran, I noticed a man in the truck watching me, but didn't return the stare. I went into the shop to pay for my gas. As the cashier was putting my payment through, he looked surprised at something behind me. I turned around and my body felt like it could jump out of my skin. The man from the truck was standing close behind me, close enough to touch me by bowing his head. He didn't move, just stared. I walked around him and went to the restroom. I locked the door to the restroom as well as the stall door. When I opened the door, he was standing there waiting. As I walked to my car, he followed me. I stood by my locked car, keys in hand, looking at the man, who was a few feet behind me, in the reflection of the window. We stood there like that, him staring and me waiting to unlock my door. I was afraid that if I unlocked the door, he'd do something crazy like push me in and take off. What was probably almost a full minute later, he slowly walked around to the front of my car and said, "You be careful out there," before getting back into his truck. I got into my car, locked the door, and waited. He didn't move his truck to pull out until I moved my car. I got ready to pull back onto the highway, waited until a chain of a few big slow logging trucks were about to pass, and then pulled out quickly in front of them, nearly cutting them off, before gunning my poor little car's engine to speeds it had never before been at and has never been since. I hoped that I'd run into the police and get pulled over, but I didn't. This was near a piece of highway where women have gone missing before. In short, possibly could have been a missing woman along a dangerous stretch of road. "You be careful out there," were some of the most chilling words I've ever heard. In middle school, I volunteered to work one period for the school library rather than have study hall. I got along really well with the head librarian. I'd say he was the first adult I thought of as a friend. He was really friendly towards me. A few years later, I came home from college on break and my mum starts asking me questions about him. Turns out, he had been inappropriate with several people at the school. In short, didn't become the victim of the librarian. Now I have self-esteem issues. When I was very young, probably 1 or 2, my biological father hired someone to take out my mother and I so that he could leave the country. We lived in Europe and you couldn't just leave without taking your wife or kids, and he didn't want to pay alimony. Fortunately, my biological father lied to the guy to convince him to do it and said that my mother was awful and that I was a brat. The would-be murderer saw us in a park and decided to warn my mother at a party he knew they'd both be at later on. A few clarifications, this happened between 1989 and 1991 in a country that was still technically a part of the USSR. My mother told me this story and I verified it with relatives independently. If we're all going to be skeptics, then I guess I can never be sure if it actually happened, and I can't trust anyone, but if I have to go through life thinking that, and thinking that my mother lied to me for no reason at all, then I'd rather believe a lie. What was the worst reason a teacher gave you a bad grade? Because he didn't read my paper. It was a university class where a TA was responsible for grading the papers. He was clearly overwhelmed and just reading introductions and grading based on them alone. I had a 2-part introduction that fully addressed the prompt, but as he only read the first part, I got my paper back with a big C at the top. I ended up getting full credit after I challenged the initial grade. My first large college paper, for a pre-Civil War history class, freshman year, came back with a giant red D written on it, with practically no feedback. I was in a writing room and I'd always excelled at essays, so I was sort of shocked. Went to the professor and asked him about the grade and lack of instruction. He sighed, looked down and said, "Westhoff, I don't like you." He went on and on after that with some bullcrap reasons, but apparently the big issue came from the first week of class. He was talking about manifest destiny and said something like, "Now, you have to remember, back in these days, there were about 50 to 100 miles between towns out in the western USA. And I'd raised my hand and said that there was still 50 to 100 miles between towns in the western US. He said I was exaggerating and I told him I wasn't because that's where I grew up. That paper was 40% of our grade. He refused to change the grade or even reread it. I scraped a C+ in that class and I was so freaking proud of that grade, even though it was the worst grade I received in my life. At the end of the semester, I decided to ask him for his grading documentation to see if I could challenge the paper with the school, but he claimed that he'd already thrown it away. I found out later that was bullcrap too, but I didn't press any further. We had weekly spelling tests in my 11th grade English class, which I thought was a bit remedial by that point, and had probably said so in a not completely diplomatic way. The teacher even made you write any words you got wrong 5 times and hand that in to her by the end of the class. I'd typically get perfect scores on them, but one time I got a test back with no actual errors, marked as a 0%. My teacher's explanation was that she saw me talking to someone in our free period before class who ended up doing poorly, and that was my fault because I distracted them from possibly studying. Wrote in Chicago format and lost points. The assignment instructions said to write in Chicago format. To anyone curious, I did try and point this out. I basically still lost points, but they upped the final grade. I have nightmares about getting the wrong footnote format as a former history student. I seem to remember one of my courses using a different format than all of the other courses at my university, and it messing a lot of people up. I did a presentation in biology. The teacher told me she wanted me to do a creative introduction instead of just opening it with the standard, "Today I'll be presenting." So I did. I invented a short story about an old lady going to the supermarket and worked in some early symptoms of Alzheimer's, the topic I was presenting. I was so invested in that character, she had a name and backstory. I even drew up a few comic panels, so that everyone could follow along easily. Then, at the end of my presentation, I asked my class which symptoms the old lady in the story had, and hence what stage her Alzheimer's was. I get my grade back and the teacher deducted points for the intro since she told me to do a creative intro, so it wasn't an original idea. What? Like what the heck? I came up with the story, I drew the comic panels, all of that was me. I felt so betrayed. If I hadn't done a creative intro, she would have deducted points, so I did one and she deducted points anyway. And after all that work, still grinds my gears. I was 15 at the time. I was taking a 1-week online class. In the syllabus, the teacher said you must post 6 times throughout the week. So I posted 6 times on Monday, once on Wednesday, and felt I was good to go. I got my grade and comments, and the teacher wrote, "I thought you had some good posts early in the week, but then you stopped posting, so I had to mark you down." I was annoyed by this, but then realized it was the last online course in the program, and frankly, I didn't care. I still graduated, and that certificate is proudly sitting in my junk drawer for all to see. Taking online courses now, and the rule in almost every single class seems to be 1 post and comment on 2 of your classmates' posts. Every week it's the same posts. This topic is really interesting and important. I really learned a lot, especially about, a quote from the lecture slide, then a few responses saying, "I really agree. This topic is really important in today's industry." A friend of mine got a -1 for scratching his head. Our teacher said he was faking it. I guess that teacher had too many bad experiences with women who faked head scratches. My 7th grade gym teacher gave me a D because I hardly ever smiled. My life sucked at that time. "You seem like an unhappy kid. Let me give you something else to be unhappy about because of it. The beatings will continue until morale improves." I got marked down because the staples weren't in the right spot for my essay, even though I had them top left corner like always. That's when you know the teacher doesn't like you and is literally looking for petty reasons to take points off. Not me, but a 7-year-old student I coached for a public speaking contest. She's a child prodigy, a self-taught fluent English speaker in a country where very few people speak good English. She also has a natural sense of how to structure a speech and gives all of her speeches impromptu instead of memorizing. After she finished her speech, the first response from the judges was, "Do you think you speak better English than us?" Spoiler alert, she does. I spoke to them and none of them were truly fluent. They then gave her the second lowest grade possible. She got a bad grade for being better than the person grading her. What grown adult is freaking threatened by a 7-year-old who specifically has been trained for the task they're judging? I didn't like a movie that was supposed to be the teacher's favorite. She'd do stuff like this all the time to other students as well. Complaints were made, but I graduated before I saw where they led. She gave me a 0 because she didn't think that I'd read the book. She said I would have gotten a 75% if she thought I'd read it. 75% of the test questions right supposedly means I didn't actually do the reading. Still one of those things that tease me off even 10 years later. In the 90s, my family didn't have a computer and I had no access to one. I spent a lot of time on a handwritten assignment for school and the teacher gave me a B, writing as a comment, "I would have given you an A if you had typed it up on a computer." I'm still bitter. My teacher lost my coursework on the bus home. I refused to redo a year's worth of work in 3 weeks and I got taken from an A to a C. Bullcrap. The school sided with him. This happened at my secondary school as well. The teacher won't admit to losing the work, and then it becomes you versus them on if you actually submitted it or if they lost it. I've never seen a student win this argument. Seems like if you're going to pull that nasty stunt as a teacher, you should at least never admit that you lost it in the first place, even to the student. Just claim you never received the work. My friend failed French because she had a French accent. The teacher couldn't understand her French because the teacher was American. My friend had spoken French since she was 4. I got points off because of the bad grammar in the quote that I used. The quote was Oppenheimer's, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." I got a 10 out of 10 on a test, but my teacher took points away from me because she didn't want my classmates to be jealous of my grade. This was English class in a Dutch school, so English is a requirement. I was the only native English speaker in my class, and this was a course for adults only. 4th grade, the day before Thanksgiving break. There was no work to be done, of course, so we had a busy work art assignment. We were all handed graph paper and told to color each of the squares either yellow, orange, red, or brown, and once we finished, we were supposed to cut out corn shapes to make Indian corn decorations. I already thought this was stupid, and filling in all of the squares was tedious, So I traced the corn shape on the graph paper and only filled in the squares that would end up as part of the final product. This meant my decorations looked the same as all the others, but I didn't waste time filling in squares that would just get cut away. When the teacher saw what I'd done, she gave me a 50 for skipping work. A spelling test, not graded by the teacher but by the kid next to us. Kid named Anthony decided that all of my words that had letters U and E were switched and marked pretty much every word wrong. They weren't? Like, this was probably in 3rd grade, so my handwriting was chicken scratch, but that was really stupid to me. I was upset since it was the first time I failed something in school. I remember doing tasks in school all the time that required us to switch papers and mark each other. It was a way of saving time for the teacher, of course, but also a way to find out which kids were vindictive little jerks that wanted others to fail. When I was 16, in the middle of doing my GCSEs, my dad got into a serious car accident. He was in intensive care for about 2 months. During that time, we were told he would probably not survive. Thankfully, he pulled through, but in the meantime, I hadn't been doing any coursework or going to school. This happened in January, my exams were in May and June. I managed to do enough revision to pass my exams, but I never managed to finish my coursework for art class. The quality of my work was worth an A, but I hadn't done enough of it. I applied for mitigating circumstances, meaning that if I granted, my work could have been marked on quality rather than quantity. But for whatever reason, the school refused, so I ended up getting a bad grade. That was 10 years ago, and I'm still angry about it. I broke my right arm in the 3rd grade. I write with my right hand. The teacher gave me a bad grade because my writing with my left hand was barely legible. In the 3rd or 4th grade, some girl in my class broke her right arm, and the teacher did the same crap to her. And after the poor girl got upset about it, the teacher compromised by assigning some other girl to do her writing for her. They both had to sit at the very back of the room together, so the one girl could quietly dictate to the other all of her writing needs. Everything from multiple choice stuff to full-on creative writing assignments. And the girl who had to do the writing still had to do her own work and was given no extra time, as far as I know.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I failed the literature exam in college because I answered a question too well. We were supposed to write an essay comparing and contrasting one of the books that we read that semester to a modern concept or ideal. We'd known about this particular question for weeks, so we had plenty of time to prepare. Apparently, it's possible to be too correct, because the response I got was that, though it's clear I didn't plagiarize, none of my thoughts were original and matched too closely with the author's interpretation of the work. I was the only person in my class to not only fail, but to get less than a B. I got no other bad marks on the rest of the exam, either. He failed me based just on that one part. I too got a lowered grade for answering too well. I'd studied and been to all the class sessions, so I knew the material well enough to be very succinct in my answers. Only filled half the blue book instead of BSing the whole thing. He gave me a C only because it was too short. From then on, I went back to skimming the reading and BSing the entire blue book tests. Made A's the rest of the semester. In high school, I used the word lascivious to describe a character in a book, and my teacher didn't know what that word meant. So logically, he took off a point. Me? Miss, you didn't give me a point for this, but it is on the mark scheme. The teacher? I don't agree with the mark scheme, so I didn't give you the mark. For context, this is a standardized test, which is why there is a mark scheme. This is a practice test. We used past papers and hence past mark schemes. Still complete bullcrap, though. By the same standard, if the narrator becomes a teacher, he can mark people down if he doesn't like the standard pens the students are issued. I got an F the first semester in chemistry, and I was really pushing myself to get a better grade for the next semester. I needed a good grade to study what I wanted. Then we heard that another teacher from another school would make the test, but the teachers in our classes would grade it. So I've been doing all in my power, reading everything, written summaries, doing the math, watching documentaries, and I got the final grade, D, and I was very happy with that. Then my teacher takes me aside and tells me that I actually got a way better grade. C could pass as a B, but if he gave me a C, it would look bad for him since I got an F on his test the semester before. So I was pretty teed off with that, but he left before I could say anything. It was my last day of school as well. When I was in college, I had a professor walking around collecting a homework assignment that was 10% of our grade. Being the unorganized person that I am, I was digging through all of my folders trying to find which one has it. She walks by me as I'm still looking and meanders toward her podium. Before she even gets to the front of the class, I find it and run it up to her to hand it in. She looks me dead in the eyes and said, "That's late. You got a 0. I called her a string of horrible things. She really was, this was just the final straw, and dropped the course and took it again with an amazing professor the next semester. Didn't happen to me, but a teacher kinda gave everyone in a class bad grades because they ditched her. They all planned to hang out after the last class. I guess she was bitter about it. This would be an A paper from other students, but you can do better. I got a C and no other feedback on how to improve. Area of improvement. Learn that overachieving only leads to more work, no job promotions because you become indispensable at your job, and non-monetary achievement certificates to hang in your cubicle. That teacher did you a favor, to be honest. I wish I was joking. I had a crappy religion professor back in junior high school. She lowered the grade of another student because they'd written in the exam that when Moses got the 10 Commandments, there was lightning when the correct answer was thunderbolts. Serious non-native speaker here. I know the difference between thunder and lightning, but what exactly is a thunderbolt? It's another way of saying a lightning bolt. Not really a correct way, but a way. I had a high school French teacher who failed me on a written test for using pencil. He claimed his eyes only saw pen. My family was outraged and called the dean, and the dean was like, "Oh well, he's getting them ready for standardized tests." My entire family had master's degrees, or more, and were like, "What standard test is in pen? It's always pencil. This is a school." Years later, I have my doctorate, and not one gosh darned test ever was pen only, standardized or otherwise. My paper didn't make her feel happy. It was an analytical writing course designed to teach how to write a thesis. The teacher was one of those super hippie artsy people, and most of the curriculum involved just writing articles she failed to get published. So we had to do this analytical discourse on someone's work, and it was trash, so I picked it apart. I got an F. I went to her saying, "What the frick?" I followed the rubric to the T. Her response, "Oh, well, the paper was good and all, but it didn't make me happy. It was kind of mean, and I don't like mean." I said, "The assignment was to find flaws in the paper. It had countless." And she replied, "Yeah, but it didn't make me happy. You get an F." I went to the chair, and it turns out her father was on the board of directors and she had sued the school several times, so she was bulletproof and got to do whatever she wanted. My grade came because all tasks had room for interpretation, multiple answers, and opinion, but my teacher only accepted his own exact opinion, interpretation, and choice. And I just remembered I had a teacher who gave me a D because he lost one of the 2 papers I gave in for my math exam. I took a low level, the lowest possible, modern literature course in college. The professor was apparently someone people knew. They had us read Dracula, specifically a copy of Dracula that they had edited, or something. I don't remember exactly what the contribution to the specific edition was, but their name was on the copy of a book originally published more than 100 years prior. The professor accepted no original thought, or even really unoriginal thoughts unless they were cribbed directly from them. I made the very basic connection between Dracula and the serpent in the garden. There's a passage in the book that straight up makes this comparison if I remember it right. It was dismissed as unfounded because that's not what the professor had talked about in class. The professor just wanted us to parrot back what he said in class on the test essays. It was a surprise to me that there was more creativity in some of my low-level engineering courses than there were in my low-level literature courses. When you have more open interpretations in math-heavy subjects than in your subjective opinion of literature, there's an English teacher who needs to be fired. Damn tenure. Also, the next story contains Spanish and you're going to have to excuse the narrator's terrible pronunciation. Not a bad grade, but I remember I was so close to being the first person to ever score 100% on my 10th grade Spanish final. The one question I got wrong was, ¿Qué tipo de comida es el pescado? What type of food is fish? The answers were A. El carne, meat, B. La fruta, fruit, C. El pan, bread, D. La verdura, vegetable. I of course picked meat and got it wrong because my teacher insisted that fish isn't meat. She's a Catholic and eats fish on Fridays during Lent. According to her, the correct answer is fruit because fish are sometimes known as the fruit of the sea. What the actual frick? Screw your 99%, senora. She liked my dad, so she gave me a bad grade and called him to go talk to her about it. I thought my design teacher had it in for me as he kept giving me Ds for what I considered pretty good artwork. So to prove it, I had my professional graphic designer father do my homework, another D. Then I had my professional illustrator mother do it the following week, D. When we called him out, he didn't really have an excuse on why he considered professional standard design work only to be worth a D in a grade 10 project, but we enjoyed calling him out in a meeting with the head of the year. I lost 2 points out of 10 on an assignment because a full mark means perfection and only God is perfect, and -1 point is only for instructors and professors. Each point mattered at the time because a full scholarship was on the line depending on our grades through the semester. Just to clarify, I lost 2 points out of 10, which is actually 2% of the whole grade. This was in the United Arab Emirates. I lost several more grades and similar assignments. In one of them, it was questions from a paragraph, so once I asked him and went through the answer step by step logically, he got defensive, accused me of wronging him and that he grades arbitrarily, and left the class. I lost 3 more points after that. I lost the A grade even before the final, and thus lost my chance at the scholarship. Nobody in the administration cared. I still resent him to this day. Essay topic: Was Henry V a hero? I argued he wasn't because crazy risks involved. You're not allowed to make that argument. F. Because I was homeschooled. I was getting my AA at a local community college and was getting my electives to pursue a degree in teaching. Several of our papers required us to write about our classroom experience as children. I got very poor grades on those, and when I asked the professor, she essentially said it was because I had no real classroom experience. Because little boys don't work hard enough to get an A, despite the homework, classwork, and exams being straight A's. I never tried again and coasted from then through graduation 10 years later. I was 7 or 8, in 2nd grade, so early 90s. She said that to me, then said it to my parents at the parent-teacher meeting a few days later when I complained. They complained too, and the school sided with her. The next year, the school put me with the best, most influential teacher I would ever have. Just a beautiful human being. I would even go back to visit her every year until she moved out of state. Miss her like hell. She even wrote me a letter of recommendation for getting into college. A super long shot, but Miss Showman, if you ever see this, I still love you and my whole family still misses you. Handwriting, often when the teacher refuses to let me type it. For the final submission of my graphic design college qualification, the brief was to design branding for a pub or club. I got a B because my concept was too cool. The brief was pretty basic and open-ended. It was basically along the lines of a brand new night spot has opened in the city. It's a pub during the day and converts to a club after hours. Design and develop a brand to promote this new place in the city. She apparently pictured a sort of dive bar in her head when writing the brief, but it was never made clear. She'd never once mentioned it when looking at the interim development stuff as I worked on it over the month we had to finish it. I could have changed tack at any point, but she never course-corrected me. The sheer mind-fricking bullcrap of that actually knocked me so hard that I didn't even bother pursuing it as a career beyond that course. What are some unexpected ways a potential hire tanked their chance at a job? English is my second language. I moved to the US after college and got an interview for an engineering position at a top aerospace company. I was nailing it, as far as I know, until the hiring manager asked, "How is your relationship with your current manager? Would it upset him if you leave, or would he say good riddance?" I thought good riddance meant something positive, like good luck or best of wishes, so I said she'd say the latter. I didn't get the job. A great example of why no one should be afraid to ask questions in an interview. I once saw a resume that stated they were a valid Victorian. Either they were trying to say they were the top of their class, or that they were a genuine person from 19th century England, neither of which were true. I recruit for the blue-collar industry, and there was a poor guy where English was second language who kind of struggled to understand me, but we had Samoan and Tongan-speaking staff who were assisting in the recruit process. We were through the interview process, and while pre-employment substance screening via urine sample, I was explaining, in depth I might add, the requirements of the test. Pee in the pot up to here, close the lid and bring to me for the test. When he was taking quite some time to pee in the pot, which can happen if people are a bit nervous or shy, I called out to see if he was okay, which he said, "Yeah, boss." About 10 minutes later, he appears and the pot is wrapped securely in hand towels so as to not be on display. I found this odd, as the amount of samples we do meant that we were so used to handling pee it was second nature. He looked a little sheepish and coy, very telling of someone who perhaps was a little nervous that they might fail. I took the cup from him, with sanitary gloves on of course, and proceeded to unwrap the pot in order to undertake the test. I gagged when I realized he had shoveled his number 2 into the pot, assuming he needed to provide a more solid sample. What possessed him to think we wanted to analyze his brown matter is beyond me. Fair to say we couldn't employ him on that day on that basis. I sent him away after some explanation and he was quite embarrassed. Having saved him all the embarrassment I could, he came back the next week to correctly complete the test after I'd set him up with a colleague and proceeded into a job the very next day. 2 years later, he's one of our most reliable and hard-working staff. As someone who works in their second language, I've made some embarrassing gaffes and mistakes in my life. Some of them make me cringe to this day. However, I've never shuffled my own number 2 into a cup and handed it to my boss, so there's that. Props on him for being able to do it on command, actually. In my job, I've interviewed hundreds of individuals. One that stands out for an entry-level retail position, I called him for an interview and after introductions, brought him up to the break room for the interview itself, as the training room was in use. He was kinda sketchy looking, wearing a beat-up black cap and what looked to be a dirty hoodie. But I didn't think too much of it because A, I did call him on shorter notice, and B, I don't like to judge a candidate solely on how they look. And C, it's retail. What do you expect candidates to look like? I excused myself for 30 seconds to check in on my trainee, and when I came back, the candidate looked a little uncomfortable. Not thinking much of it, we start the interview asking the standard questions about what he's done previously, why he wants to work here, etc. I notice he continues to look uncomfortable and it almost looks as if he's hiding something in his hands. I eventually ask if there's something wrong I can assist with, and he comes clean. He explains he has a fistful of candy, jelly beans in this case, and he's not sure what to do with them. I'm a bit gobsmacked and have questions, which I wish I could have asked. Where did he get this candy? Why did he think it was a good idea to eat candy in an interview? What was he going to do with this candy? As I tried to articulate a response, he exclaims, "I know," and proceeds to shove the entire handful into his mouth. And this isn't a couple of jelly beans. This is a massive handful of now sweaty, sticky candies that he has just thrown into his mouth. And he starts chewing and chewing. His hands are stained and he's really working his jaw due to the sheer amount and chewy nature of them. I swear 30 seconds pass before he finally gulps them down and asks calmly, "You were saying?" Needless to say, the interview didn't continue much longer than that, and unfortunately, the candy man did not get a job with us. This is an old professor of mine's story. A long time ago, his department was looking to hire some kind of new junior assistant professor type. That narrowed it down to 2 highly qualified guys, both fresh out of grad school. They knew they were going to hire one or the other. As a final step of the process, they decided to take both of them out to dinner separately. The first guy was cordial throughout the whole thing and seemed to get along with everybody. Seems just fine. Then at the end of the meal, he picks up his empty plate and licks the whole thing clean. Like, tongue flat against the surface of the plate, covering every inch of it until it's clean, in the middle of a nice restaurant. Then he just sets the plate down like it was the most normal thing in the world. Everyone just stares at him and then awkwardly try to just wrap it up. Afterward, they laugh about it to each other like, what the frick? What a bizarre and unnecessary way to throw away a near clinch on a good job opportunity. So then they take the second guy out. Almost just a formality at this point. Again, everything is fine, he's polite, seems perfectly qualified, seems to know the right things to say. Then at the very end, they ask him if he's had any questions for them. He pauses and thinks for a moment, then goes, "So, what is the student-teacher dating policy?" Afterward, the other professors were sitting around together and one of them goes, "Well, looks like we're hiring the plate licker." Worked in onboarding for a while, basically just putting people that other folks hired through the hiring process. One guy wouldn't answer any of my calls, emails, or text messages. Then, in reply to emails from the hiring manager, said I hadn't attempted to contact him at all. Hiring manager sat 2 desks over from me and had listened to me leaving voicemails for 3 days. Guy promptly lost all chances at the job when he accused me of not doing my job. Opening line of the covering letter of their application. "Today is the day when my worst fears were realized." From there, it was a litany of everything that had ever gone wrong in their life. Sadly, it also seemed like they were the result of consistently bad decisions. I'd have thought that they were just deliberately trying to throw the application, except that it had just so much excruciating detail. It was a lot of effort. Job location: London. Candidate location: Denver. Candidate willing to relocate? No. I'm currently getting sent resumes from foreign nationals, some of whom aren't authorized to work in the US. We're a small firm that does 95% of our work with US Gov entities requiring a security clearance. Candidate arrived in rollerblades, stayed in rollerblades the whole interview. He used the word blade instead of walk or go for the whole interview. Can't tell if I was being punked. He was in his early 20s, resume was good but not great. The whole rollerblades thing wasn't a deal breaker, but it definitely didn't help. He insisted on sitting on the desk rather than on a seat, so his rollerblade feet could just hang. I had to insist a couple of more times throughout the interview for him to reluctantly take a seat, which didn't help either. Well, you went to college. I studied the blade. It's a good thing the narrator wasn't the one in charge of the hiring process, because this guy seems rad as heck, and if he pulled that last line, I would have hired him for the ironic joy in a heartbeat. When I managed a retail store, it wasn't uncommon for people to bail on job interviews with last-minute or no notice. But there was only ever one person who no-showed the interview and then called the next week asking if they got the job. So, do you guys do substance tests? Yes, we do. For like all the substances? Yes. Okay, thank you for your time. And then he got up and left. So it can be a good idea to call and check on your application, but don't call the store, ask for the owner, and see if he's looked at your application 1 hour after you left it with us. This person actually called 3 times throughout the day, and each time we told her, the owner will review your application tonight after we close, as this is the busiest time of year for us. Spring at a greenhouse. Please don't name your resume job crap. We had a guy come in for an interview and he showed up a full 40 minutes prior to his scheduled interview. One room office shared by 3 people, so there's no good place for him to wait. I said, you can go to the coffee shop next door and come back at the scheduled time. He said, no, I'll just wait here. I have a phone call to make. He proceeds to have a very loud phone conversation in our one-room office. When it was finally time for his scheduled interview, he was still on the phone and he actually shushed me and said, I'm on the phone. 10 minutes later, he was ready to be interviewed. Not even sure why we proceeded with that interview, but it was over quickly and his resume was in the recycling bin before the door even closed. Posted this before, but it's always good for a revisit. The applicant said, so, you all do background checks, criminal history for this job, right? Me? Yeah. Okay, so the court messed up, and when you run my background check, it's not going to say statutory, but it was totally just statutory. I work at a hospital on a surgery floor. We had 2-part interviews, one with the unit manager and one with either a nurse or an aide. We have a series of questions to ask based on a survey they fill out at the end of the application. She managed to make her way to me, and this was her response to a question. If you saw a coworker doing something unethical, like stealing from a patient, what would you do? She said, it depends if it was valuable or not. I mean, who hasn't stolen something before? I had to take a personality test for a job once. The test was all questions like agree or disagree. It's okay to take money out of the till sometimes, or everyone steals from the register from time to time. At first, I was all, hell no, that's stealing. But by the end of the questionnaire, I thought maybe it was much more widely accepted than I thought. I was hiring in pharmaceutical sales, and it was a large launch for a to-be newly approved product, so they were hiring about 200 people nationwide. Because of this, first step was a phone screen with us, then a video interview with the hiring manager, before flying candidates out for the final panel interviews, where they would meet with 5 individuals, vice presidents of HR and sales of each region, and sales directors for those territories. Because of this, we were very strict with the interviews and who moved forward, which means it really sucked when a guy went into his final panel interview and started doing magic tricks. Very seriously, he started pulling flowers from his sleeves, and he tried to vanish an interviewer's coffee, but ended up spilling it everywhere instead. In that same round of hiring, we also had an individual who did his video call from his coffee table. He sat on the floor, and he had someone ring his doorbell. From the conversation with the hiring manager, he asked politely if he could go to answer the door in case it was an emergency. She said, sure, no big deal, and the guy stood up, flashing his tighty-whities. She didn't say much about it when he came back, but needless to say, she couldn't stop laughing when she told us about it. In short, don't do magic tricks in your interview unless you're interviewing to be a magician. If you do a video interview, please wear all of your clothes, pants included.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
My boyfriend just told me the story of a new bartender they hired who got fired after one day. Why? Because she couldn't open a can of beer. One of the places I worked at once fired a new bartender barely 3 hours into his first training shift. Why, you may ask? When the bartender training him sent him for more ice, he didn't return for over 20 minutes. Plus, when he did eventually resurface, he had no ice. The manager got weirded out and checked the cameras. He had spent his time rifling through bags in the staff area until he found a pack of smokes and a lighter, which he then took and went outside for a prolonged smoke break. My favorite part of this whole debacle was when he showed up a month later trying to return his staff uniform and get back the money he paid for it. The first uniform was free. Gotta respect the hustle if nothing else, and I mean it. I'm not sure that employee had any other redeeming features other than his drive to scam the place. Doing a text screen phone interview, and you could tell the guy was Googling his heart out every time we asked a question. He'd say, let me think about that for a second. The background ambient noise would cut off and then cut back a second later, and he'd start reading off stuff from the top Google result. I had somebody pull this on me once. It was the most obvious thing in the world. There'd be this huge pause before they'd all of a sudden just start rattling all kinds of facts off. If you actually knew the answer to that level of detail, it wouldn't take 15 to 20 seconds for you to start answering questions. At one point, I brought up the Wikipedia page for the subject on my phone while she answered, and silently followed along with her as she pretty much read it out to me. This was my first phone interview ever, so my boss was sitting with me. Afterwards, he told me that he nearly closed the interview by saying, "Well, you have a good Wikipedia-level understanding of things, but you're not quite what we're looking for." I once called a guy for his scheduled phone interview, and he answered the phone as if he thought I was a telemarketer. He was incredibly rude and asked who I was at least 3 times before understanding I was calling to interview him. After realizing his mistake, he wasn't even apologetic for yelling at me. It was a tense interview, and he did not move forward. I once called a woman for a scheduled phone interview, and her husband answered. It was a landline for better connection. I introduced myself as the individual calling for her interview, but when I asked to speak with the wife, the husband said, "She's dead." I'd just spoken to her the day before the schedule, and I said I was so sorry I hadn't realized and was so sorry for his loss. He didn't sound upset, but kept repeating that she was dead and trying to usher me off the phone. So I said I was so sorry but would cancel her interview and would pull her information from our system so no one would accidentally follow up. I was starting to get the feeling that something wasn't right, but still trying to be respectful when he starts backtracking and asks where I'm calling from again. I told him again what company I was calling from for our scheduled phone interview, and he suddenly says, "Oh, I thought you were a telemarketer. She's right here in the other room," and hands it off. The wife was very angry with her husband. He had been trying to convince me for about 3 to 4 minutes that she had passed away, and it turned into one of the more awkward phone calls I've ever made. It was for other reasons that she didn't move forward, though. Had a guy who reluctantly told me he used to work at an adult store. To try and save him from feeling weird, I told him that my wife has always found it fascinating and would love to work in one. His response? "Well, isn't she a frickin' weirdo?" I'm a lobby guard, so I don't do the interviews. However, I have had interviewers ask me how the interviewee behaved in the lobby while waiting. Most just sit there twiddling their thumbs nervously, but 9 out of 10 times those who ask me questions about the company and the team they're interviewing for are hired, and 10 out of 10 times the people who are genuinely rude to me are never hired. I would have thought that this is common knowledge. Why on earth would you be rude to literally anyone when you're interviewing for a job? Assume that you're making an impression on everyone. I used to be a manager where we did a lot of hiring. I've now probably hired hundreds of people and looked at thousands and thousands of resumes. A lady with an MBA applied. At first glance, she seemed interesting, and then when I googled her school, it was clearly a degree mill with a somewhat similar name to a real university. There was also a guy who told me the only reason he was applying was because he was ordered to by a judge to get a job, because he was years behind on his child support. When asked what the story was on his lengthy employment gap, he also said he'd quit working to avoid paying child support. To top it off, he clearly wasn't qualified for the position and had lied his way into the interview in what I'm guessing was some kind of malicious compliance with the judge's orders. There was also a guy who asked my coworker on a date. During his interview, he didn't get the job or the date. The entire job was doing phone support. She said she didn't like talking on the phone. Then there was the guy who stopped answering my question to tell me that wearing glasses was making my eyes dependent on glasses and I should stop wearing them. There was the fellow whose first question, before we even started, was about our indecent behavior policy. So were his second, third, and fourth questions, including detailed scenarios. I'm not sure if he was doing that for a sick joke, but either way, it wasn't great. Our male receptionist welcomed another one and escorted him to the interview room, where I was sitting. He asked if we were waiting for the receptionist to return and asked if I could make him a coffee while we waited. I explained that I was the hiring manager and he laughed at how funny it would be to have a female boss because it was so unexpected. And finally, when we started on the tech questions, this lady said she didn't know how to use a computer and wasn't going to learn because they were too complicated. She wasn't that old, maybe mid-40s, and it was only about 10 years ago. I have no idea how she made it in the world. I imagine that someone who works in mass hiring positions would basically be able to create a menagerie or circus of some of the individuals who they talk to. This lot would be a great start, and they'd be getting jobs. Win-win! I work in software development. As part of the interview process at my company, our candidates interview over Skype using a code-sharing website for them to complete a small and relatively simple problem to help weed out candidates who are dishonest on their resumes. In one of my interviews, I started with the usual introduction of myself, my role within the company, so on and so forth. I introduce her to the task and explain that it'll be on a code-sharing website and that she'll need to follow the link I'll send her to access it. I paste the link into the text window and explain to her how to access it. Some people haven't used Skype before and don't know how to access text chat in a video call. She smiles and nods and asks me when I'm done, "Will you be writing the link on the whiteboard?" What whiteboard? I look behind me and remember that yes, there is a small whiteboard behind me, and this woman was expecting me to handwrite the not-so-short link and she would read it off the webcam and type it into her browser. No, I explain, I sent you the link within Skype itself. If you'll just click… I'm forced to trail off as she reaches forward and picks up her webcam, which I'm assuming was mounted on the top of her monitor. I get a nice close-up of her eye as she peers inside the camera, then turns it on its side to observe it some more. I ask her what she's doing. "Trying to find the link," she replies. Dumbfounded, I once again explain that the link was sent over Skype and wouldn't appear behind me nor on the webcam. She resumes the smile and nod routine as I ask her to follow my directions to access the Skype text chat window. I ask her to wave her mouse cursor over my face until she sees some buttons appear. She takes her hand off the mouse, raises it and waves it over the screen. I explain to her again that she needs to use the mouse and she smiles and nods again. After about 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview, she did finally discover the link in the Skype text chat, but she proceeded to type it into her browser by hand. She did not make it to the next round. On the inverse of some of these other posts, I went into a job interview where the manager said, "Look, I don't really care, you're my 30th applicant in a week and everyone has failed the substance test. If you can pass the substance test, you're hired. I don't even care about anything else anymore." I passed. It was an awesome job and he was a great manager. I was doing a video interview with a candidate in a new office we were opening in another country. For background, it was a tech company, so we were a bit informal and I was wearing a company-printed t-shirt so you could easily see I have tattoos. This candidate calls in a few minutes late, but I give him the benefit of the doubt on that. We start talking and discussing the role when I hear his doorbell ring. He gets up immediately, yelling back to his computer that he'll be just a moment. I can hear him let the dishwasher repair person in, be guided to the kitchen and told all about the problems with said dishwasher. I sit there entirely dumbfounded but decide to continue the interview out of sheer curiosity. The candidate came back about 5 minutes later, answers some more of my questions, and then I asked what questions he has about the role so I could wrap this up. Apparently, this is what he was waiting for. "It's so cool that you've got tattoos. Did you do them yourself?" "No. Do you have any role-related questions?" "Well, I've done them all myself. Let me show you." The candidate proceeded to take off his shirt and point out each of his tattoos, telling me his age for each one. He even pulled his pant legs up to his thigh to show what he'd done on his legs. I was dumbfounded. He offered to send me his portfolio. He did not get the job. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications.
Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.